I did not put having a picture of Andrew Tate on my wall on my 2026 bingo. I have my tea, not only because it makes me sound smarter, but also because my throat is kind of going, and I'm going to be talking about this for a little bit. If you've already clicked on it, you've passed the vibe check. Hey Janae, it's Julia, the ex-English major, and today I am going to be doing a in-depth breakdown of Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Northanger Abbey is my absolute favorite satire, and it simultaneously aged like milk and like fine wine. If you just want to go ahead and get into the summary of the story, I will go ahead and timestamp it since this is going to be a long video. But before you go, I think that the story itself is way more important when there is a why behind it. And so I'm going to go ahead and jump on into the why. It'll help it color the story. I'm going to go ahead and send it to Julia from the past to explain why Northanger Abbey is so important and is so relevant to today before jumping into the actual in-depth plot summary. I have my tea, not only because it makes me sound smarter, but also because my throat is kind of going, and I'm going to be talking about this for a little bit. I am going to start this off with a brief history of the novel. And bear with me here. I'm going to keep it brief, though I have gone through and done some research on this. I also have my old English degree, just a bachelor's degree to talk about this, and I have an insane obsession with Gothic novels here, but those are my credentials. So again, anyone can put anything they want on the internet. If you want to learn more, there are people who are much more educated and much smarter than me who have a lot to say about this topic too. This is the TLDR of the brief history of novels. When novels first kind of were written out, they were written by men. They were seen as something that was new, hence the name novel. And instead of something that was outright philosophical, instead of something that was either an allegory or a history, they were something that was new, something that would teach you things about life, but it was a story that was told about a character going through their lives. And again, this is something that was really popular among men, and it was seen as something novel and new and exciting. I should kind of clarify here, it was seen for men, but it was also for the elite, right? Somebody who was, this goes for all writing, pretty much if you were reading, you were elite because you had learned how to read, but also you had the time to sit and read, right? If we aren't fighting for our basic needs, then we have a lot more time to be reading. This is the case now. It's also the case back then. This was something that was reserved for a specific class of person, but it was seen as something new, exciting, and intellectual for men. As with most things, it didn't stay only for men for long. We had also some women who were being educated to read, a lot more than you would think, but it was again reserved for a woman of a certain social standing, right? She had the time to read. A lot of times women worked if you were of a lower class. She was not out there working. This was for a certain type of woman who could go ahead and read, but a certain type of upper class woman began to start reading novels. And as these women started picking up these tales, we started to see kind of a pushback of gendered reading, where novels were seen as for women, novels were seen as a little bit lower, and men pursued different types of writing. Men pursued actually poetry. Poetry was seen as extremely manly, where novels were for women and weren't as upper crust anymore, weren't seen as intellectual as much anymore. Men would pursue things like histories still, they would pursue philosophy, and they would pursue poetry. And that was seen as manly, where women would turn to novels. It was sort of a shameful thing to be reading novels specifically. It was something that women did, and it was seen as a womanly pursuit, much more than a man. Men would still read novels, but it wasn't something they would advertise. And even women, a lot of them wouldn't advertise that they were reading novels. I have a partial quote here from Northanger Abbey, which kind of gets into what I'm talking about. I am going to be cutting out pieces of the quote itself, so just know that going in, and later on I will read the full quote to you, but I do just want to call out that this is a partial quote. So this is straight from Northanger Abbey, and it talks about the sentiments about women reading novels. I am no novel reader. I seldom look into novels. Do not imagine that I often read novels. It is really very well for a novel, such as the common cant. And what are you reading, miss? "Oh, it is only a novel," replies the young lady as she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. "It is only Cecilia or Camilla or Belinda." Now, had the same young lady been engaged in a volume of The Spectator instead of such a work, how proudly would she have produced the book and told its name? We are seeing, even in Northanger Abbey, there is a discussion about women being shamed for reading novels. This was something that women did. It was seen as a womanly pursuit. Men would read novels too, but again, it was a woman's book. And so there was shame and stigma around novels, and women were not expected to loudly proclaim their love for novels. It was seen as something that women did, and it was kind of looked down upon. This gets thrown even exponentially higher at the entrance of the Gothic novel. A Gothic novel is all about sensationalism. It's all about shock value. A lot of Gothic novels would take increasingly ridiculous, absurdist plot points, things happening, and what they would do is they would throw characters in these high, intense, emotional, horrifying scenarios of greater absurdity and watch how those characters played out. And they would work on kind of shocking the reader with what's happening on the page. A lot of these novels had to deal with really scandalous things, dealing with temptation, sexuality, on top of kind of ridiculous things where we'd have ridiculous acts of nature. Think a giant helmet falling down and crushing someone. Think spontaneous combustion. And the point of a novel was kind of this, to explore these shocking things, and it was sensationalized. It was highly emotional. They were both absurd as well as something that was meant to shock the reader and grip the reader and kind of horrify the reader and titillate them and excite them. And so it was all of these messy things at once. And so the Gothic novel was extremely frowned upon when it kind of entered the scene, but it was also extremely lucrative because it was doing these highly emotional things, and readers would just completely hooked and gripped in. One specific Gothic author that I'm going to call out is named Anne Ratcliffe. She has a lot of popular titles that are referenced both in Northanger Abbey and that have stood the test of time. So you might have recognized some of these titles. We've got Mysteries of Udolpho, we've got The Italian, we've got Romance of the Forest. And Anne Ratcliffe was not the first to write a Gothic novel, right? There were people before her, men and women, who were writing these tales, but Anne Ratcliffe is someone who we can really point to be doing it and doing it really well, and was well known at the time. She was extremely popular, and she was extremely popular among the female readership, the mostly female readership that was engaged with her novels. Again, novels in general were seen as women's books, but Gothic novels specifically were seen as women's books. They were read mostly by women, and a lot of female authors were writing them to kind of explore some of the taboos that aren't really talked about in society, things like sexuality, things like temptation, things like morality, in these kind of shocking, gripping tales. And they were frowned upon by a lot of readers, a lot of male readers, but just as they were frowned upon, they were extremely popular. A lot of these were highly emotive, very taboo topics that she was writing down. And kind of riding on Anne Ratcliffe's coattails, we started to see a boom in the Gothic novel. We started seeing lots of penny dreadfuls, quick cash grabs, these people who were kind of capitalizing on this market, on the success of Anne Ratcliffe and others like her, to produce a ton of these Gothic novels. Honestly, a lot of them are slop. Some of them are not good. A lot of them have not stood the test of time. They're fun and they're enjoyable, but like, some of them just aren't great. But we do have quite a few that did. If you are going to kind of dive into the realm of kind of obscure Gothic novels, like, go for it. I loved that. That was kind of one of my favorite things to do. Some of my favorite books are some of these kind of obscure Gothic novels that haven't really made it into the quote unquote canon that have stood the test of time that we've really liked. But I don't think I can stress enough like how much some of these books are the like 18th and 19th century of the dead dove do not eat tag. It is truly like the Wattpadification of like rape and murder and all of these horrible things. Think what the broodiest 13-year-old, 14-year-old would write, kind of that when you give someone who thinks that they're dark and angsty a pen and tell them to go ahead and tippity type away, a lot of them are not great. A lot of them are just kind of the most edgy thing that someone could think of and putting it down on the page with little other thought to it other than just to horrify and to titillate. But with kind of this rush of them, you would find some diamonds in the rough that were exploring some really interesting, really nuanced topics with honestly quite a bit of depth, especially for the time period, about some of these taboo topics. Some of them are talking about discussions about getting into temptation or the responsibility of your actions. What does it look like if the person who is the most corrupt is a religious figure, someone who is powerful, someone who is trusted, someone who is seen as holy? What happens when that person specifically is the person who gives into their basest desires and acts some of these horrifying atrocities out? Who is responsible for this man's actions? Is it him, or is it the object of his desires that tempted him into those actions? That is a big exploration in a book called The Monk, which is published in 1796 by Matthew Gregory Lewis. Kind of a foil to that one, that it was kind of interacting and talking back and forth with The Monk, is a book that's discussing about specifically female sexuality and race, especially what it looks like to have your good white woman falling in love with the devil of a black man who is of a different social status. And so exploring that, exploring the deviancy in female sexuality and a woman being attracted to a man of a race that was deemed as quote unquote lesser. That is one of the major topics in a book called Zofloya, which was published in 1806 by a woman named Charlotte Dacre. And it was so kind of scandalous that she would not publish it under her real name for a while into its publication history before she decided to come out. And again, when she did write this book and reveal her true name, it was seen as something horrifying. Not only that it was written, but that it was written by a woman. When just a few years earlier, The Monk, written by a man, came out, and honestly, in my opinion, having read them both, they're both kind of shocking, and they're both kind of part of this sensationalist trying to horrify its readership. But honestly, in my opinion, The Monk is worse. Another one that was really popular is a discussion about free will and how much of our future is predetermined. If we had some sort of freak accident that killed your father, how much of what follows and the atrocity that follows is due to your own personal ownership, your own personal actions and your own responsibility, and how much of it was predestined? How can you behave rationally when you are faced with something frankly absurd, something crazy, something like a statue of a helmet falling down and crushing your dad that leads you onto this big gory tale wherein you commit atrocities? How much of what you do as a human being is because of your own actions, and how much responsibility do you need to have on these things? Or how much can you blame on the supernatural, on fate, on something that was predetermined for you? And no matter what, you are stuck on your path, no matter how much you try to fight it. That is a scenario or themes discussed in Castle of Otranto, written in 1764 by Horace Walpole. Was not one of my favorites, but it does amazing things for the genre, and it has stood the test of time. And honestly, compared to some of the other Gothic novels that maybe haven't made it into the canon, I can see why that one has made it, even though it is, frankly, a little bit absurd. How about, what is the responsibility a parent has to their child? Is evil something that is born in us, or is evil something that comes from neglect? And how much of the evil in the world do we have to blame on how we are raised? Generations that came before us have left their imprint or lack thereof on us. Those are some of the themes talked about in Frankenstein, written in 1818 by Mary Shelley. How about, we're talking about absurdists, what if the man that you are in love with and who has given you the 1 ounce of security that you have ever felt in your life, what if you fall head over heels for a man and find out that he has a whole other woman kept in his attic? And how much can you really know about the people that you love? That is one of the themes that is explored in Jane Eyre, written in 1847 by Charlotte Bronte. Not all of Gothic novels were written by women. Not all of them were good. Not all of them have stood the test of times. But a majority of these novels were written by women, and honestly, a majority of the readership were for women. Does that mean that men didn't secretly read novels and Gothic novels? Of course not. Books are books, but they were seen as women's literature. They were seen as things that women would read, and the men who read them wouldn't really talk about it, and even the women who would read them would look on it in shame. They would kind of diet down. They would talk about them, yes, but it was something that some women were shamed for because they were so scandalous. They dealt with these kind of outrageous, absurdist things. And yes, they talked about really important lessons, some of them, but they were seen as having little to no educational merit and were just purely sensationalists. Why is it that some of these things were seen as women's literature? Why is it because it's written by women for women and deals with things that affect women? It's talking about the complex inner workings of the mind, talking about how to stay rational and kind of keep a happy balance of emotion and reason in increasingly absurdist situations, trying to deal with kind of the fantastical horrors that happened in the real world and put them in a small package that can be kind of unpacked and rationed with? Is it because it's dealing with things of sexuality and desire in a safe place? It's within the pages of a novel. Why is it that we deem that kind of thing when it's written by women for women as taboo and as bad, but we have things that are seen as high art and manly at the time period, like poetry that deals with the exact same thing? That's accepted because it's a poem, and poem is for men. Poetry is for men. It seemed as okay. But women, they have novels, and they would deal with the same kind of thing that's looked down upon because it's loved by women. So earlier I read you a partial quote, and here it is in full. "What are you reading, miss?" "Oh, it is only a novel," replies the young lady, while she lays down her book with affected indifference or momentary shame. "It is only Cecilia, or Camilla, or Belinda, or, in short, only some work which the greatest powers of the mind are displayed, in which the most thorough knowledge of human nature, the happiest delineation of its varieties, the liveliest effusions of wit and humor, are conveyed to the world in the best chosen language." Now, had the same young lady been engaged with a volume of The Spectator instead of such a work, how proudly would she have produced the book and told its name? To be clear, not all Gothic novels are good. A lot of them are bad. But to discount the entire genre as a whole as being bad or rushed or shameful or just capitalizing on a scandal does a disservice to the genre as a whole. And the fact that it's only done because women are reading it is ridiculous. There was a massive push at that time towards novels being seen as corruptive, things that we need to keep out of the hands of our good young women, and they shouldn't be dealing with these things of sexuality. They shouldn't be dealing with these themes of the horrors of emotion. Women are facing horrors every day. They're facing them back then. They're facing them today. So the fact that it's seen as shameful in women's literature is frankly ridiculous. And you might be saying, "Hey, Julia, why are you getting heated about this? What does it matter? This was the 1800s. Those people are long dead." And yes, you are right. People still publish Gothic novels, but they're not the traditional Gothic novels that I'm talking about from the 1800s, the 1700s, things like that, right? Those people are dead. The people who were intimately affected by Gothic novels and being shamed for reading them, they're long gone. But though history does not repeat itself, it sure as hell does rhyme. If any of this sounds familiar, then cool, you're seeing what I'm putting down. Even though nowadays we don't see novels as for women and things like history and poetry for men, reading is absolutely still seen as gendered. And in my opinion, I think that that is why this novel specifically, why Northanger Abbey is so important. If any of this sounds like the discussions that we have today about books that women like, and some books are for women and some books are for men and never the two should meet, heaven forbid, and it is still a little bit more okay for a woman to dabble in the men's sphere, but men should not dabble in the quote-unquote women's sphere, then it's gonna sound pretty familiar. We have things today like lit fic or chick lit is for women, but things like nonfiction or self-help books, those are for men. Men shouldn't be reading fiction, they should be reading nonfiction. Or science fiction and fantasy is for men, but romantasy is for women. I'm going to fully throw my bias out there. I love romantasy. I love a wide array of genres. I also dabble in the quote-unquote men's books. I also dabble in things like science fiction, things like high fantasy, kind of your true fantasy, the fantasy that's written by men for men. I enjoy that too, but I love romantasy, so I'm coming in here biased. But I do want to kind of reiterate that not all romantasy is good. Some of it's slop. Honestly, a lot of it's slop. We're seeing kind of the same thing that we saw of the big push in the Gothic novel, where a lot of it's mass-produced, a lot of it is written for shock value, a lot of it is written because it's popular and selling, and so people are trying to make a living. And not all of it's good. A lot of it's gruel, and you know what? I sometimes will hold out my little plate like a Victorian child and eat that gruel up. I num 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 eat that slop. But a lot of it is poorly written. And there are some damaging aspects to some of the things that we see in a lot of romantasy books. A lot of them kind of are normalizing a lot of cis-het gender roles, and I'm 100% acknowledging that. A lot of these books have kind of a tiny, feisty 18-year-old protagonist, and she is kind of pursued and needs to be protected by this big, strong, brooding, oftentimes he is ancient, he's hundreds of years old, but he always has to be 6'4". There is a kind of a lack of diversity and thought in some of these, and it's not necessarily wrong, so to speak, if we're just talking about that in a piece, because you can read romantasy, you can enjoy romantasy. I read romantasy.
I had a pony.
I enjoy romantasy. I like it loudly. I like it unabashedly. I am a romantasy girly, but it's not necessarily just because it's not wrong for you to read those stories. It's also helpful to examine those stories with a critical lens and to hold space for both. You can enjoy kind of turning your brain off in these stories, so long as you are realizing that even when your brain is off, you may be being affected by some of the messages in that story. Enjoy what you want, girl, but also just kind of think critically about how you're consuming and make sure that you exercise that ability to think critically with your media one way or another. Whether you're doing it in every single book or not, make sure that you still can do it. And your brain is a muscle and it's something that you should exercise. And so there are problems in romantasy, but overall, romantasy on the whole is fine. And so what I think we get into the broader problem than girls enjoying their little fairy porn is to consider the entire thing as fairy porn. Talking about it as something that when there are 1, 2, 3 sexual scenes in a book centered around, heaven forbid, female pleasure, that becomes such a problem. But then we have these male authors talking about it equally, if not more, in some of these, but because it is looked at through a male lens and is not centered around female pleasure, that becomes the fact that that makes it high literature and that makes it worth studying. But over here, anything that deals with female sexuality is something that we need to criticize and label as for women. And there's where we see kind of that divide where they're doing the same things. It's a small piece of these novels for both. There are some that have more than others, authors, but that happens on both sides of the quote unquote lane here. We have these books that are seen as kind of these true fantasy books or true science fiction books that deal with 1 to 3 scenes on page of sexuality here, but they also are dealing with oppression, and they're dealing with injustice, and they're dealing with greater things. And over here on the romantasy side, we are seeing the exact same thing. We have these books that, yes, they have 1 to 3 pages of explicit sex in them. And that's something that we should be, cognizant of and make sure that children maybe aren't reading those things. But they are also exploring things about the human condition. They are exploring themes of oppression, themes of politics, abuse. Suddenly that is seen as not worth our time, but we have the same things over here, and this is what we should be spending our time on. People pick up books that are extremely prominent by male science fiction and fantasy authors that deal with sex and sexuality within the pages. We've got people like George R.R. Martin, William Gibson. Hell, I just read Philip K. Dick the other day for the first time. Both of the 2 books that I read from him had on-page sexuality and on-page sex explored, at least in some part, on both of them. But we are seeing those authors as acceptable, and people should be applauded for reading George R.R. Martin and Philip K. Dick, and those books are good. They are enjoyable. I loved them. But also, if it's over here, we're seeing those same kinds of things. And though there are some women who are loud about reading them, and girly, go for it, same. You do not see a lot of men reading those books, but you sure as heck see a lot of women reading these books that I'm talking about over here. A perfect illustration of what I'm talking about is Sarah J. Maas. And to be clear, Sarah J. Maas is not necessarily my favorite author, but she is someone who is a really good kind of case study, and I see a lot of Anne Ratcliffe in Sarah J. Maas. We have these books that are kind of applauded as these kind of big poster children within the romantasy sphere. We have a lot of people who took them, and though she was not the first to do it, and though she is not the only person to do it, she is somebody who capitalized on it. Her books become extremely successful, extremely popular, and a lot of people are trying to recreate what she has done in her books in them. Her work is a really good example of how 99% of your books can be dealing with really important, heavy topics, but they are kind of brushed aside because of a few sex scenes that are written in them. So I'm going off of the 2 series that I have read from her. The first one is my favorite one, and is Throne of Glass. Throne of Glass is an 8-book series that honestly explores a lot of topics, but one of them is the huge impact of small acts of kindness and human connection, and how those pieces, those little bits of kindness, can have a ripple effect that have this massive impact. And sometimes it's about the little things and the little kindness and the little bids for human connection that make the world keep going and that keep evil at bay. So we have these small moments. Nobody is ever unimportant in her stories. We have small characters and tiny throwaway scenes that come up in one book and they're tucked away, and then 8 books later it has a massive impact. We have the giving of a cloak to one cold prisoner, and though that prisoner later dies and the person who gave her the cloak never sees her again, that comes around and is the reason that evil is battled, that the war is won. Just the giving of one single cloak to a prisoner who was cold. We have friendship, how it's radically self-sacrificial, and the power of friendship and the power of having the right people in your corner and being okay with sacrificing your all for a friend. That is a huge recurring theme in that book series, as well as how art is political, and even a group of musicians who stand up against tyranny and oppression has this broader impact on the story, and is one of the most quoted scenes in the book is a group of musicians using their art to fight tyranny and to stand up against injustice, even knowing that they will be made martyrs of and they will be forgotten and never seen again. But in that moment, they're going to use their art because art is inherently political. But oh, by the way, because there are some sex scenes that don't begin until book 4 in an 8-book series, depending on when you read it, the whole thing is slop. The whole thing is seen as porn and is something that women should be shamed for reading. Another one, which is probably her most popular one, is ACOTAR. Did I like ACOTAR as much? ACOTAR is A Court of Thorns and Roses for the uninitiated. Did I like A Court of Thorns and Roses in that series as much as I liked Throne of Glass? No. But one huge thing that I can think of as a major theme is the theme of abuse and abusive relationships. And in book 1, we are learning about how this man and how he can dote on her and he can love her and she can fall for him and he can still have red flags, but she kind of pushes them aside because this is her one true love. And then as soon as he starts becoming more and more abusive, and as soon as she opens her eyes to the abuse that's happening, she leaves him, and never once is she seen as weak or timid or like bad for falling for this man, but instead she is written as powerful because she got away from him. And so it's important because it's showing about how abuse doesn't happen in a vacuum. It's something that escalates. And nobody falls in love with somebody who on day one, they're beating them. But slowly and slowly over time, relationships can change. And our main character sees how the relationship has changed. She mourns how the relationship has changed. And then ultimately she removes herself from the situation. And she is seen as powerful for doing so. And she is somebody who is lauded for recognizing the signs of abuse, even in somebody who she thought she loved and who she thought loved her. And honestly, her abuser probably did love her, but that love was not the only thing that was needed, and her safety and her well-being came first, and so she removes herself from that situation. But because there are probably about 1 to 2 scenes in book 1, and then a couple more in later books, it is all seen as slop, all seen as something shameful, that something that has no value and something we should not be reading. Some works like this are seen as only for women or only for anti-intellectuals. And yeah, some of them aren't great. Yeah, sometimes the writing style might not be amazing, but for every 5 books out there that I would call slop, there's one diamond in the rough. And we shouldn't be criticizing that diamond in the rough when we have, because of all this slop, simply because of female sexuality written on page, when over here there are quite a few other books that I would consider quote unquote intellectual books that deal with the same thing. Not all romantasy is good and not all Gothic novels are good, but there are some really clear parallels between the two. The kind of messy playground and nuance, specifically when it comes to romantasy novels. I'm not the most qualified to talk in, nor am I the first to talk about some of these things. A lot of these topics are extremely popular on the internet, so I'm going to go ahead and on the screen here, I'm just going to list some other popular videos that are dealing with the topics of romantasy, modern writing, and politics and the male gaze. So if that's something that you're interested in, go ahead and watch some of these videos. I am just a person on the internet with a microphone and a phone that is available to record. And some of these people have dug into this topic way more thoughtfully than I have. Some of these creators here are talking about just kind of general takes on romantasy that I thought were fairly enjoyable. So go ahead and check any of these ones out if you are more interested in just kind of general takes on romantasy, some of the statistical breakdowns in some of these. I think that these are really well done. As well as when I was talking about it, another piece that kind of I fell down the rabbit hole a little bit is gendered literature. And so here are some great videos that I found about gendered literature specifically. And I noticed when I was going through a lot of these videos that a lot of these videos are about gendered literature, but they're by women and female creators. And I also am, if you haven't noticed, I also am a female creator. So I think it'd be really interesting to kind of see more about the take of gendered literature, maybe by a man, especially since Book Talk and Bookstagram and BookTube are becoming increasingly more female spaces. And so one of the great things about being a small creator is I only have, at the time of filming this, I have 50 subscribers. And so one of the cool things for me is if you interact with my videos, I know you by name. I'm talking to some of my other kind of male subscribers who have interacted with my channel a little bit and whose videos I've also watched. I'm gonna call you out by name. You don't have to go ahead and do these things, but if you are interested in kind of your take on gendered literature, I would love to hear your take. So we've got Magnino Alex or Some Okie Dude. Genuinely, if you have any kind of thoughts or opinions to kind of add to the discussion specifically about gendered literature from a male opinion, I would love to go ahead and watch that video. So go ahead, and there is a free gift of something if you are interested in it. I'm not assigning you homework, no worries. And if you are watching me, go ahead and check out any of their channels because specifically I know that Magnino Alex and Some Okie Dude, they have a lot of videos out there and have quite a few topics that overlap with some of the things that I do, and a lot of their books sometimes overlap with mine. So genuinely go ahead and give their channels a watch. In a similar vein, again, shouting out other random subscribers of mine who are doing some of the things that I do. We have Pixie Dust and Paperbacks, who she is a booktuber. She's new here and she has interacted quite a bit with some of my things. And so Pixie Dust and Paperback, if you have anything to add to this discussion, I know specifically Pixie Dust and Paperback is somebody who she enjoys some light romance, but she doesn't like it to take over the whole story, something she's mentioned in a couple videos. And so if you have anything to add on the topic of romantasy and topic of kind of romance books being pushed so much, genuinely would love to hear your take. And if you are watching my videos and you are interested in some of hers, go ahead and check out her channel as well. It's one of the fun things about being a small creator is I know a lot of you by name. And so not trying to call you guys out, but if you have anything, I would love to hear your discussions on it. And if you're watching my video and you have a bunch of time, you should go on over there and check out some of their videos too. Now, finally, we're getting to how this all ties into Northanger Abbey, probably the reason that you clicked on this video. Northanger Abbey is a satirical book, and what's so good about it is a Gothic novel, quote unquote, that's satirizing Gothic novels and is also a love letter to Gothic novels. So it's a book that is so clearly poking fun at these tropes and at these pieces, but it's done with so much care and so much love that it's like, is she poking fun at it or is she actually a lover of these things? And I think you can be both. I think that in Northanger Abbey, she's kind of calling out some of these things where it holds space for the fact that some of them are garbage and a lot of them are garbage. And that's okay. We can like trash sometimes, and that's all right. In Northanger Abbey, Jane Austen pokes fun at the kind of genre of the Gothic novel at the whole, but she also loves these books, and you can tell that she's read so many of them, not only just because she calls out a lot of them by name, and a lot of obscure ones by name, but she also is relying on these tropes so much that it's so clear that she herself is writing a book poking fun at these things because 3 days ago, she was reading one and she couldn't put it down. She is reading them, and not only is she reading the good and the bad Gothic novels, but she's reading them critically. She's not just consuming these novels, but she's interacting with them, she's engaging with them, and she's turned her brain on while reading these books that sometimes are encouraging people to turn their brain off. It's acknowledging their importance as a way to connect with others, the importance of the life lessons in some of these novels, while also arguing for the fact that we shouldn't only be reading these novels. We shouldn't be passively reading these novels, but we should be using them and reading them and enjoying them, but also going and reading widely and also going and touching grass, because we shouldn't go ahead and read these sensationalist things and expect that that's how all life should be. It is equal parts a plea for women to read these books and for men to read these books, but also to read other things and to experience the world and not to expect the world to go exactly how things that are written on these sensationalist, absurdist pages, not to expect that that's how life is, and the dangers of reading these things and only these things without thinking critically before going out into the world. It's not morally wrong to enjoy these sensationalist Gothic tales, as so long as you're not just applying that and expecting that's how the whole world is. It also, Northanger Abbey discusses about how men shouldn't discount these novels and men should be reading them. They have equal parts value to men as to women. But women, if you're reading them, and men, if you're reading them, don't stick to one genre, but read widely. Read Gothic novels, but also read histories, read philosophy, read poetry, read both quote unquote women's literature and quote unquote men's literature, and how it's important to read widely, read diversely, and don't just pigeonhole yourself into one genre, but to spread out. You don't have to enjoy everything the same, but you should be reading everything. It's also a big point of it is talking about the power of books as a community builder. And oh my goodness, isn't that true? I'm here on the internet talking to whoever you are because of books. Books are a community builder. Who among us hasn't picked up a book and then immediately put it down and talked to a friend, either to praise it and be like, oh my gosh, you have to read this too, or to shit talk it, because sometimes books are awful and it's fun to have a community to talk about how shitty some books are. Northanger Abbey was the first book that Jane Austen wrote. It didn't get published until after her death. And so by the time it was written, when it was written, the books that were referenced in it were extremely zeitgeisty. They were extremely of the time. And by the time it was actually published after her death, those books were old news. Things come and go. Some of the popular titles flip around, and they are just as much kind of fast fashioned today, where you see it seems like some of these books are just flying off the shelves, and then we haven't thought about a book that was published 3 years ago. We haven't heard about it, even though it was all over our For You page. The same thing was happening on a smaller scale back then, where books came and went, and things that were popular and titillating when she wrote them were no longer in the zeitgeist by the time that book was published. So Northanger Abbey was honestly kind of a bit of a flop, even for the time. But just because it was outdated when it came to references when it was published, in the age right now of book talk and smut and hyper consumption of novels, and of specifically romance novels and romantasy, Northanger Abbey's message of going and enjoying your little books and enjoying things, but don't forget to engage critically, and you can read whatever the hell you want, and you can enjoy it, and you can enjoy it loudly and unabashedly, but you should make sure that you are doing your due diligence of getting out in the real world, of touching grass, and also engaging with other types of books in order to be a well-rounded person. Both men and women should be reading widely, reading diversely, reading everything, and not discounting things because it's for men or for women, but picking up both. And so I think that that kind of discussion around reading and breaking down genres and breaking down these gendered norms when it comes to reading, and the community found in reading, and the importance of reading everything under the sun and engaging with things critically, and how it's important to like what you're reading, and you can turn your brain off and you can like it, and don't let people shame you for what you like reading, but also make sure that you are not only reading one thing, and that you are trying to go out there and find things that are good and not just passively consuming. And that is why Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen is my favorite satire. And that is the reason that Northanger Abbey is so relevant to today. And so, thus, I give you my favorite satire, Northanger Abbey. So the story of Northanger Abbey, which again is a Gothic tale satirizing both Gothic tales as well as novel readers, opens describing our main character named Catherine. No one who had ever seen Catherine Morland in her infancy would have supposed her to be born an heroine. Her situation in life, the character of her father and mother, her own person and disposition were all equally against her. Very early on in the story, we are told that our main character, Catherine, is not the type of person who books would be written about, and that she's honestly kind of boring. She wouldn't be your stereotypical main character in a story. There's nothing really special about her. So we are introduced to a little bit about her family in chapter 1. We have her mom and her dad, and Catherine Morland is one of 9 siblings. Her dad is a clergyman, and which is kind of one of those like middle of the road, fairly respectable positions, but you're not going to have a lot of money. And also, with Catherine being one of 9 siblings, it also shows that her family is not going to be very wealthy. And then we have her mother here, And both her mother and her father are not the type that are going to be locking their daughter up, which would be another type of thing that would be really popular in a novel, where maybe her problem is that she's boring, but she's boring because she's been locked away. And that's not really the case here. Her parents give her a lot of free reign to kind of do what she would like. She is able to kind of play around outside. Mainly what she does is she spends her time with her siblings, educating her siblings. Her mother is really into kind of those educational treatises on the growing of women, and she's kind of given a lot of leeway at the house to do what she wants, but she doesn't really get out much, she doesn't really travel much, and she doesn't really interact with other people very much outside of her family. This is not something that her parents kind of forced upon her or keeping her sequestered. It's more that there just isn't a lot of opportunity for her to travel with the fact that there are 9 siblings and with her parents' financial situation. Now, how Catherine does spend her time beyond, when she's younger, it said that she plays in the mud a lot. She's kind of a tomboy. She's not really behaving the way a typical girl would. She likes to get dirty. She likes to get out in the rain. She kind of roughhouses with her brothers. But as she gets older, she starts to become prettier. It's said that when she's a child, she's extremely plain, but as she starts to grow, she becomes almost pretty. She's not quite pretty, but she's close. As she grows up, another thing that she does is she stops really playing in the mud so much, and she spends her time reading novels. Her parents, being the type of people who aren't kind of quelling her behavior, aren't keeping her locked up, see this as a mostly harmless pastime and let her do this. But it's important to note that at the time period, novels, like I mentioned earlier in the video, if you watched my breakdown of why, were extremely frowned upon, seen as something to keep out of the hands of your good young girls. And Catherine Morland has a specific propensity for the Gothic novel. Our story begins when Catherine Morland and the Morlands in general are visiting their next door neighbors, the Allens. It is said that you can see the Allen home from the window of the Morland home, and the Allens are extremely wealthy. Not only are they wealthy, but they have no children. So when the Allens decide that they are going to go on a vacation, they're going to go to the large city of Bath, they would like a companion to go with them to this big tourist city. Bath is kind of the hustle and bustle. It's where things are going. It is a big tourist destination. And another big draw to Bath is these healing waters that are said to have medicinal purposes at the time. And Bath in Jane Austen's time period was the place to go. It was the happening place. And there are a lot of events that happen in Bath.
No sleep. Bus. Club. Another club. Another club. Plane. Next place. No sleep.
That is kind of the idea of Bath here, is it's very exciting. So when Mrs. and Mr. Allen decide that they're going to go to Bath, they talk to the Morlands and they request permission to have Catherine come and join them. The Morlands don't really see a problem with this. They realize that their daughter has not been able to get out much. Catherine is super excited. She is like, this is it. My life is going to begin. In chapter 2, we are reminded by our narrator, who is kind of this fourth wall breaker, somebody who kind of lets us in on the gossip of the stories that's happening. Our narrator reminds us that Catherine is naive. She's a 17-year-old girl who's never really seen the world, and so her idea of how things should go is based on the novels that she has read. So if all these fantastical things are happening in her books, then that is exactly what she thinks is going to happen when she gets to this big city of Bath. Before she goes, Mrs. Morland decides that she's going to try to give her daughter some advice. But again, Mrs. Morland is not really hip with the times, so to speak. She's not somebody who has a lot of life experience herself. So instead of warning Catherine about some of the dangers that she might face in a big town, think how to behave around men, think don't go out alone at night, think make sure that you are following by the rules of society so that way you are not seen as someone who is a woman of loose moral standing. Instead of warning her about how to behave and the expectations that are on young women at the time, she is more concerned about making sure that she's like, oh, make sure you pack enough clothes to dress warmly. It's gonna be colder over there in Bath. So a lot of these surface level advice that is not helpful for a young girl going out to the world for the first time. Mr. and Mrs. Allen and Catherine decide to go to Bath. Again, in Catherine's mind, she is used to novels. She's used to something fantastical happening. Nothing happens. It's a really boring drive. They're not set upon by brigands. It is a extremely boring and uneventful trip to eventually get to Bath. Mrs. Allen is so excited because Mrs. Allen is very into fashion. And so the very first thing that she does is she goes ahead and gets a whole new wardrobe for Catherine. This is Catherine's makeover moment. Luckily for her, Mrs. Allen is fashion obsessed, and so Mrs. Allen is going to make sure that she is dressed up in style. And her debut does not take long because Catherine Morland and Mr. and Mrs. Allen go to their very first ball. You would think that, again, it's a ball. Probably something wonderful is going to happen, something fantastical, something like out of the novels, correct? You would be wrong. Mr. Allen decides that he's going to go off and play cards and completely abandon Catherine and Mrs. Allen. And Catherine and Mrs. Allen don't know anyone at this party. And what's really unfortunate at the time is you cannot introduce yourself to someone. Someone needs to introduce you. So if you do not have connections at the time, think like networking party to the extreme at the office. If you don't know anyone, you have to stand there silently until someone that you do know invites you into their group and says, hi, your name is Catherine? Well, this is my friend Geraldine, and only then are you allowed to talk. So Catherine and Mrs. Allen have to stand there on the sidelines and watch everyone as the party is happening around them, but they are not allowed to go and interact with anyone because the rules of society state that they need to be introduced before they can go ahead and talk to anyone. You would think that this would be a bad impression for Catherine on a ball, and you would be right that she talks about how she is bored out of her mind, but as they are finally leaving, when Mr. Allen comes back from his card game and decides to take them all home, Catherine hears a group of men talking nearby about her, saying that she is beautiful. And so this skyrockets her mood, and she thinks that overall it was a very successful ball, and she decides that, yes, my very first ball in Bath was a success. As time passes, we start watching how Catherine and Mrs. Allen kind of get settled into the routine that is Bath. They're going to pump houses, they are walking around, they are taking their promenades, they are going to balls. They have kind of that routine that is very typical in Bath, where you just go from event to event to event. But remember, Catherine and Mrs. Allen don't know anyone, and Mr. Allen has not been able to introduce them to anyone. So even though they are going to these events, they are not able to socialize with anyone. One day, Catherine is at a ball, and shockingly, there is a man who comes up to talk to her, and it is very scandalous for the time that he does come up to talk to her. His name is Henry Tilney. He is smart, he is attractive, he is witty, and Catherine is immediately head over heels for Henry. The fact that he kind of comes up to her and rescues her from her wallflowerness, she is absolutely smitten with this man. When they show up, there is kind of this funny exchange where Henry Tilney is being very inappropriate to kind of approach Catherine and Mrs. Allen, and without a formal introduction. However, before Mrs. Allen can go ahead and berate him and tell him off for being so inappropriate, he makes a passing comment on Mrs. Allen's muslin and her dress. And remember, Mrs. Allen absolutely loves fashion. And so the fact that there is a man here who knows about fashion and actually knows about fashion well, this isn't posturing. He can tell from the discussion with her the quality of the muslin, the cut of the dress, for both Mrs. Allen and Catherine Morland. And so Mrs. Allen is absolutely swooning over this man as well, because Her husband doesn't even know about fashion of the time, and she can never get a man to sit and listen to her talk about fashion. And so the fact that Henry Tilney knows about fashion and knows about fashion so much from his sister that he's talked about, Mrs. Allen allows Henry Tilney to whisk Catherine away onto the dance floor, even though it is inappropriate and scandalous. And Henry Tilney, while he's dancing with Catherine, is cracking jokes the whole time as well, making fun of the rules of society and the way that men and women in this time period have to interact. He kind of jokes his way through all of the required discussions that they have to have, talking about the dress of the people around, about the turn of the room, joking about all the entertainment there at Bath. Are you enjoying your time at Bath, Miss Moreland? And one thing to note while Henry is talking is while he's joking, he is also mocking Catherine as well. Some of the jokes are going over her head, but it seems like he is kind of doing too much for the joke, and maybe a little bit insulting Catherine as he's insulting the way that things are going around. But Catherine, being the sheltered and naive 17-year-old, she doesn't really see anything with this, and she doesn't really realize that he is kind of poking fun at her at this time, while he is also poking fun at society broadly. So he is kind of being jokey, he's being witty, but some of the jokes are going a little too far, and Catherine can't really tell that that's happening. She can't really tell that not only is he mocking society, but he's also lightly mocking her and lightly mocking her place in this. And one of the ways that he does this is by telling her that she needs to write about him in her journal and instructing her on what she needs to put in her little diary about her night talking with this handsome man who went ahead and rescued her from her wallflowerness. And she kind of claps back a little bit and is saying, well, how do you know that I have a journal at all? And he is talking about how, well, every young lady has to have a journal. And so when they do eventually part ways for the end of the night, Catherine's head is filled with her encounter with the dashing Henry Tilney, and she is already looking forward for the next time that she can see him. The next morning, Catherine and Mr. and Mrs. Allen are discussing around the things that happened at the ball, and we learn that the Allens actually quite like Mr. Tilney. Again, Mrs. Allen is very much in his favor because he knows all about fashion and women's fashion due to his sister's helpful influence. So she's smitten. She loves him. And we also learn that he is from a very respectable family, and he is a clergyman, which is the reason why I have him as the hot priest from Fleabag. Kind of a side note about his career as well, talking about how he's from a respectable family. The fact that Henry Tilney is a clergyman lets the reader know as well that though he is from a wealthy family, though he is from a respectable family, he is not the firstborn son. The firstborn son is the one who stands to inherit, and any other son is required to get some sort of job, some sort of day job to keep themselves afloat when the patriarch eventually dies. So there are only a couple professions that were seen as quote unquote acceptable, and one of those is joining the clergy. And so the fact that Henry is part of the clergy lets us know that even though he's from this big, respectable, wealthy family, he is not going to be the one who is really going to inherit, and so he is not really destined to be living in a large home for the rest of his life. He is not really going to be destined to live in the lap of luxury that he was accustomed to as a child. Once his father will eventually die, money will pass to the elder son, and he will have to get by with the living that he's making in the clergy, which kind of echoes a little bit the situation with potentially Catherine and her father, how her dad is also a clergyman, and how Catherine and her 9 siblings have to live in kind of a small home, and they're not really in the lap of luxury. So that's just kind of an important little tidbit that Jane Austen is giving the reader there. So immediately when the reader hears that Henry Tilney is a clergyman, even though it is said that Henry comes from a very wealthy family, He is not going to be rich for his whole life, and when his dad dies, it is up to the discretion of his elder brother how much money he is going to get, and the elder brother, when he inherits, does not have to give him anything. After they have broken their fast, we have Catherine, who she decides that she's going to go to a pump room to go ahead and kind of get out in society a little bit, and the whole time she is hoping to run into Henry because she has not been able to get him out of her mind since she met him. She thought he was very witty, she thought he was attractive, and even though he kind of made jokes at her and at women as a whole and society, she just really, really enjoyed his company. And again, he's the only person that she's really met at Bath, even though she kind of had to break the rules to do so. But when she gets to the pump room, Henry is nowhere to be seen, and so she is stuck doing what she is used to doing, of sitting quietly with Mrs. Allen and waiting for someone to know them to introduce them. Luckily, they do not have to wait long, because suddenly there is a voice that shows up talking to Mrs. Allen. There is a woman who comes up. Her name is Mrs. Thorpe, and Mrs. Thorpe, back in school, back in her school days, used to know Mrs. Allen. So Mrs. Thorpe saves the day by recognizing Mrs. Allen, going over and introducing herself and her daughters to Catherine and Mrs. Allen. Now, Isabella is Mrs. Thorpe's eldest daughter, and Isabella and Catherine Morland become thick as thieves super quickly. And the reason that these two ladies become so attached so quickly is because Isabella loves Gothic novels, and Catherine also loves Gothic novels. And so they spend their time and their bonding moments talking about these super scandalous, risque books. If you are someone, think about how that friend of yours who you've met simply because you have a similar hobby, and it feels like all that you talk about in the beginning is that hobby, but then later on you go ahead and get closer, and even though maybe you two don't agree on all of the same things, they are your quote-unquote hobby friend. They're that friend of yours who also likes pickleball, who also likes Star Wars, who also likes comic books, who also likes romantasy novels. They are the kind of person who, even if you aren't necessarily, wouldn't be their friend if you didn't have that one thing holding you together. That one thing holding you together is kind of that bond. And so these two ladies absolutely become friends for their love of these shocking Gothic novels. And now Catherine has someone who she can talk to about these scandalous novels that she reads all the time. And we have Isabella, who has even read some more than Catherine. Isabella is older than Catherine. Isabella also knows the rules of society better than Catherine. And so we have a bit of a power imbalance here with these two women as well, where Isabella knows the rules of society. Isabella knows how to play with things to get what she wants, and Catherine is still very naive. This is Catherine's first trip outside the home, and it's kind of clear that Isabella has been widely around society. It's also made clear that Mrs. Thorpe has the absolute best intentions, but Mrs. Thorpe is a widow, and she has a lot of things taking up her time. She has quite a few children, and so some of her times her children kind of run amok, and it's not really seen as a failing on Mrs. Thorpe that way her children behave. It's mostly seen that she is a grieving widow who has too much on her plate, and so she's just a mom doing the very best that she can, and that's kind of made pretty clear in the novel by our narrator. Now, as these two women get closer, we find out that there is another coincidence. Not only does Miss Thorpe know Mrs. Allen from their days in school, but Isabella says that her brother is friends with Catherine's brother. They are both friends from their days at Oxford. And so this is kind of an even bigger thing where Isabella says, oh, I know who you are because my brother talks about your brother all the time. So our brothers are best friends. We also have to be best friends. Not only do we like novels, but we have family that are friends. So it's going to be really fun to get to know you because my brother speaks very highly of your brother. That night, the Thorpes and the Allens, they go to the theater. And the whole time that she's watching a play, say it with me, Catherine is trying to see if Henry Tilney is there, and she is disappointed that Henry is not in attendance. Now we are cutting to a few days later. It's been about 10 days, the narrator lets us know, since Catherine and Isabella became friends. Like I said, they were fast friends, and now they are closer than ever. Catherine and Isabella do everything together. You do not really see one without the other, and they're going to all of the hottest, latest events together, arm in arm. Isabella sometimes takes some swipes at Catherine, and Catherine's kind of too naive to really see anything different. In the first one that we're kind of given in the book here, now that it's been about 10 days, is they decide that they're going to meet at a pump house. Again, it's just kind of the latest place to have their gossip, to walk around, to kind of talk and gossip about their novels, about the boys that they've seen, about the balls that they've attended. And while they're there, Isabella kind of says, "Oh, Catherine, you made me wait here forever. I cannot believe that you left me here alone waiting for so long." And Catherine kind of tells her that, "I didn't think that I made you wait here very long. I'm right on time for the agreed upon time." And Isabella kind of assures her that, "Oh, it was so boring waiting here, and you're kind of a bad friend for making me wait for so long for you, but no worries. Let me talk about my latest book that I have been reading, this thing called Mysteries of Udolpho." Catherine is currently reading it for the first time, and Isabella has read it before, and they are kind of gushing about the book. Isabella is kind of saying, "Oh my goodness, wait until you get to this part." And Catherine's saying, "Please, no spoilers." And Isabella says, "Well, I cannot wait for your reaction when you get to." And she proceeds to spoil part of the book for Catherine. And Catherine gets more excited about this. She doesn't really get angry that Isabella has told her a piece that's going to happen in the book. If anything, she is a little bit more excited to read it now that Isabella, who is older and wiser and knows more about books and about society, has kind of given her a bit of a taste of what's to come. The conversation turns from novels to kind of other women in the town. Isabella is kind of gossiping and kind of backhanded complimenting or talking about this woman behind her back named Miss Andrews. She's not really super impactful in the story, so I'm going to just kind of gloss over it, but know that Isabella is also frequently talking about people behind their back, and is kind of talking down about some other people at the town here. So all in all, Isabella isn't necessarily the best friend that you'd want to have, but Catherine, being naive, being 17 years old, and finally having someone to talk about these books that she's obsessed with, she is kind of excited just to have company, just to have someone to talk with, and someone specifically to talk about Gothic novels with. So she doesn't really mind that some of the gossip is turning a little bit catty. She doesn't really mind that some of the things that Isabella's talking about maybe are showing some red flags about Isabella's true character. She's just happy to have companions in back. After the little bit of the gossip session, the two women change tactics and decide to talk about what they're going to wear for the ball. This is the Regency era equivalent of texting your best friend saying, "Hey, what are we wearing for this event? Because I want to make sure that we match. I don't want to get too dressed up if you're going to be wearing jeans, but I also have this really cute top that I want to wear." And so the two women here decide that they're going to match the same for tonight's ball, and Isabella specifically is mentioning about how men notice these things. And we are starting to kind of see a pattern as well with Isabella, where she tends to know a lot about what men want, and where Catherine is kind of going through her days pretty naively. Isabella knows the system, Isabella knows men, and Isabella knows how to get men to do her bidding, and knows how to be alluring to men. Isabella notices that there are these two guys who are paying attention to them. And Isabella talks about how, "Oh, it's so annoying that these men are around. Let's go ahead and leave a little bit." So they go ahead and leave, and the men start following them. And Isabella is talking to Catherine about how, "Oh, don't look now, but they're still here." And Catherine eventually watches as the two guys go ahead and leave and go down a different alleyway. And Isabella says, "Oh, well, let's go ahead and take this path." And Catherine points out that, "Hey, the path you just suggested will put us right in the way of these two boys again." And Isabella says, oh, no, no matter. And so it's kind of clear that Isabella is talking about how she is uninterested in the opinions of men. She is uninterested in kind of what men are following them. But it's very clear that Isabella is putting herself into the path to be noticed by men, to be kind of seen as an object of desire. And Catherine is very much going along with Isabella's plans here because she doesn't want to be the stick in the mud with her friend, even though Catherine truly doesn't seem to have any sort of desire to be surrounded by these men. She is mostly just happy to be in Bath, and she is mostly just still daydreaming about when she will run into Mr. Tilney again. Now, as Isabella and Catherine are walking down the street that would conveniently put them in the path of these two men, suddenly there is a carriage that pulls up, and in the carriage are none other than the best friends, John Thorpe and James Morland. So John and James look over and see that these two women are their sisters, and so they stop, and now it is kind of this quartet. Now, when they are talking, we kind of get a little bit of the character of these two boys here. Jane Austen kind of lets us see some of the things that they're about. James is kind of a friendly bickering with John, very much like that kind of like the friends who tease each other, the friends who are kind of boisterous and loud, but those guy friends who they'll like rib on each other in public. It's kind of implied here. This is just my own reading of it, not necessarily from Jane Austen, but it seems to me that the dude bros here, they will rib on each other in public, but it's pretty clear that they probably have kind of would be loyal to each other in private, and though they kind of make fun of each other and poke fun at each other in public, because that's what men do, they are close friends, right? They're best friends, and it does seem like it is kind of not just quite a surface level friendship. That is my own reading of it, not necessarily from the book, from Jane Austen. That's just kind of what I internalized when reading it. So they don't really talk about them maybe having a true friendship behind the scenes, but the fact that they are here together, the fact that they are kind of talked about as best friends, it's kind of clear there. That's the reading I took from it. So when these two are around, we have, that's kind of a bit about James, but John here, he is a little bit of a wild guy. He is kind of boasting about how fast his horse is and how fancy his carriage is, which is kind of the Jane Austen Regency equivalent of some guy talking about the horsepower on his car and talking about how fast it goes, being a flashy sports car. He absolutely, if this was the modern day, John Thorpe would have like a bright red Mustang, and he would be that kind of guy who would rev it really loudly at the stoplight, waiting for it to go, or you just hear this. He would have the flashy car. They decide that they are going to go back to the Thorpe's house, and so we have kind of these two groups of people. John is talking about how there is no way he would be driving his sister around in his car, in his little phaeton, in his horse-drawn carriage. And so John decides that he is going to buddy up with Catherine, and then James is going to be driving Isabella. While Catherine is in the car with John, she is forced to endure him talking about how wild his horse is, how good he is at driving, and the whole time Catherine is kind of white-knuckling inside this carriage. She is not used to being driven around in a carriage very much, and so when he is talking about how fancy and fast and wild his horse is, she's a little bit nervous, and then he's kind of driving recklessly. He would be the type to text and drive at the same time. He would be the type to not really notice that a pedestrian's crossing the street, and so she's not having a good time in this car, and this whole time he's kind of talking at her as opposed to talking to her. As they were riding as well, John decides that he is going to be Catherine's designated chaperone, and no matter where she wants to go, he is going to drive her. And just a little bit of a historic kind of side note, or like some piece of information that would be helpful, because Catherine doesn't really notice how inappropriate this suggestion is, but at the time, Jane Austen readers absolutely would. At the time, it is kind of inappropriate for an unmarried man and an unmarried woman who are not engaged, who are not betrothed, who are not married, to be constantly seen in a carriage at that time. It is very much a kind of a claim on each other to be doing that. And so the fact that John is suggesting that he is going to be Catherine's designated driver, so to speak, and that he is going to drive her anywhere she needs to go without a chaperone, kind of open to the public, right? These carriages could be seen by the people who are pedestrians, and so it is a very public claim on her, and Catherine doesn't really notice that because she's 17, she's naive, and she doesn't really know how to behave in society because she has been living in her country house for so long. So the fact that he is making this claim and saying he's going to do this, Catherine does not know that she should decline this offer. And she more so is not really happy about that because she doesn't really like him that much. He is kind of loud, he's kind of rude, but it does make it very convenient, especially since Isabella is her best friend and he is best friends with her brother. It's pretty clear that these four are going to be hanging out for a while. We also get a very interesting exchange here where Catherine, she's bonded with Isabella about novels, so she decides that she's going to talk to John about novels as well, and he says, ugh, gross, I would never read a novel. That's disgusting. I would hate to read anything by a woman. And he says, the only good ones, The Mysteries of Udolpho. And she says, hey, that's by a woman. And he says, no, it can't be. I would never read anything written by a woman. But there's also this one that's called The Monk. And The Monk was actually pretty good. So he's denying that he reads Gothic novels and he's kind of talking down on them. But at the same time, he is making it clear that he's read at least a couple, but he would absolutely never read anyone written by a woman. Even though when he's naming the titles he's read, some of those are absolutely written by women. So does he actually not read them? Is he just kind of using words that are in the zeitgeist? Has he actually read these novels? We're not really clear as the reader. All that we know is he is disparaging women and women authors, while also claiming to enjoy the very select few, but they wouldn't be written by a woman. But if you recognize the titles, those are written by women. They get home, again, they're going to the Thorpe house. The very first thing that John Thorpe does is he insults his mom. So we really get a clear picture of what kind of guy John is. He is somebody who disparages women. He's somebody who drives fast cars. He's somebody who the first thing that happens when he sees his mom after a long time away is to go ahead and insult her and call her ugly. He is not a good dude. He is not somebody that we like. And Catherine, it makes it pretty clear in her thoughts that she does not like John, but she's a little bit unfortunate that her best friend it's her best friend's brother, and also that it's her brother's best friend. She is kind of stuck with him one way or another, and she is not really happy about this. They're walking home. Isabella asks Catherine, hey, what do you think of my brother John? And Catherine decides that she's going to lie because she doesn't want to hurt her friend's feelings, that, yeah, he's okay. He is not bad, I guess, which Catherine will later regret doing. As we are going through this as well, it is very clear that James and Isabella are becoming a bit of an item, that Isabella is interested in James. James seems interested in Isabella, and this puts Catherine in even more of a pickle because if these two are really clearly into each other, then these two are probably going to have to tag along with them and double date, which Catherine is not really happy about. It's another ball! Oh my goodness, shocker! So they're at another ball, and the whole time, John decides that he's going to play cards, and Isabella and James are dancing the night away together, almost inappropriately so, almost too many dances, to the point where Isabella kind of discusses with Catherine about how, oh, it's so scandalous how much I'm dancing with your brother, but like, I'm super going to be dancing with your brother anyway. Now, Catherine is kind of realizing that she is a bit of a wallflower. Everyone that she knows is off dancing or is off doing other things, and so Catherine is just kind of stuck yet again, watching the party happen. And lo and behold, who does she happen to notice but a lovely little hot priest, Mr. Tilney. He decides to do the correct thing and talk with Mrs. Allen for a little bit before he goes ahead and asks Catherine to dance. Catherine is super excited about this, but of course, right when they notice that you are getting some attention from another man, the lovely John Thorpe swoops in and starts berating Catherine for accepting Tilney's dance upcoming because, well, he assumed that they were going to dance. And Catherine points out to him that you never asked me to dance. And he says, I absolutely did. And I cannot believe that you are deciding to break that agreement. And Catherine muses at how it's very convenient that the one time that she is going to be whisked away from being a wallflower is that moment that John decides to stop playing cards and interrupt her. Luckily, though, Catherine kind of puts her foot down and these two start dancing. And yet again, we see the witty Mr. Tilney, and he is kind of joking about how the sanctity of a dance akin to the sanctity of marriage. And they start talking about how dancing is a lot like a marriage. And again, some of this kind of goes over Catherine's head a little bit. It's very clear that Henry is kind of joking. Mr. Tilney is not a perfect character. Like a lot of Jane Austen's novels, our male love interest has some flaws with them, and it seems that Mr. Tilney's is that he jokes a little too far, a little too much. He likes poking fun at things, but sometimes it goes a little bit too much, and he can't really be serious all the time, and sometimes he crosses a line when he is making his jokes, and he will sometimes be poking fun at someone instead of just at society as a whole. Finally, John shows up and these two have to do the obligatory dance, and the conversation is kind of contrasted here where John's talking about his dogs, John's talking about how manly he is, whereas Mr. Tilney was talking about kind of the joking about society, was making her laugh, was trying to be a little bit outrageous. John here is just talking about how very manly he is. So we're setting up these two as a bit of a foil for each other. We have kind of the jokester who is okay to deal with feminine things, and we have the man who is always kind of caring about his own alphaness, caring about him being the top dog. Eventually, she stops dancing and she still can't find Isabella, but we have another introduction that takes place where Catherine is introduced to a Miss Eleanor Tilney, who has now shown up in Bath. And Eleanor Tilney is very clearly Henry Tilney's sister, the very one who taught him everything he knows about fashion. These two decide that they're going to dance in what is kind of called a set, which is, instead of it being a one-on-one partner dance, it's going to be a group of people. And as these two are talking, Eleanor Tilney seems kind of shy, she seems kind of quiet, she seems very polite, but this is a little bit refreshing with kind of Isabella's boisterousness, Isabella's loudness, Isabella's gossiping. We kind of have a very mild-mannered, quiet Eleanor Tilney who's a little bit calm. And of course, just like earlier, where when these two kind of start to see as getting close and enjoying their company, who shows up finally for the night but Isabella, and Isabella kind of starts laying into Catherine a bit, guilting her for spending time with someone else, saying, I've been looking for you everywhere, and I don't really care that you're having a good time. We need to hang out because you're my best friend, and I cannot believe that you are trying to replace me, and all night I have been looking for you, even though Catherine is realizing that that may not be the case, because every time that Catherine has looked around, Isabella is either dancing with James or nowhere to be seen. Later in the night, Catherine finally gets a bit of air, and she is looking around for Henry, but he is nowhere to be found, and when she eventually does spot him, when she's hoping to kind of get another dance with the guy that she is so interested in, he is dancing with another woman, and so Catherine is a little bit disappointed, but she is happy that he is around and that he is back, especially because he has kind of been absent for a while. She is kind of in a sour mood after that night, but she decides that she's going to get over it, and she is going to go to the pump room with the hope of running into Eleanor Tilney again, because she realized that she was having a really good time with her, and she wants to spend more time with this kind of new girl in town who is kind of this breath of fresh air from this kind of quartet here that has been forming. When she is there, before she goes, she is kind of speaking with Miss Allen, and then shows up but this group, and they decide that they're going to whisk Catherine off. They want to kind of go ahead and go for a big country ride. Catherine's not really happy about it, but Miss Allen kind of doesn't really realize that, like, Catherine doesn't really want to go, and so she's encouraging the four of them to kind of go out. Again, we have these two together. It is more of the same, him driving erratically, him talking about how crazy his horse is, and kind of talking bad about James. John is kind of talking about how it's a little a shame that James doesn't have a nicer, fancier phaeton. He doesn't have a nicer ride, so to speak. And surely her parents can afford to give him a nicer ride. And Catherine is kind of taken aback by this because she is like, nope, he has the best that our parents can offer. So we're seeing a little bit of hints here that maybe John thinks that the Morlands have more money than they do. Eventually, she gets back home and she learns from the Allens. There's a little bit more news about the Tilneys. Henry was here earlier to go ahead and scout out a place to stay, and now his whole family is in Bath, so that's why they hadn't seen him. We also learn that the Tilneys are very, very rich indeed, and that Mrs. Tilney, the mother, is dead. That's kind of all we know about them at this time. Catherine's a little bit sad that there wasn't more to go on, but she is grateful that Mrs. Allen knows at least that much. They all go to a theater together, right? We've got the group decides to go to a theater. Catherine is looking around for Mr. Tilney, and Isabella has heard tale of this little crush, and so Isabella wants to kind of scout out this boy that her friend has been thinking about so much, has been talking about so much. While we're here as well, Isabella is just gushing over James. It seems like these two are very quickly here. Isabella is talking about James like he hung the moon, so we are starting to see an attachment forming very, very quickly. Catherine kind of talks about how she is feeling like a third wheel as these are going. She is kind of being pushed to hang out with John. We are at another ball. We have eventually been able to dance with our Mr. Tilney, with among other things, and after she is dancing with Mr. Tilney, she notices that there is a man staring at her, and he is older and he is good looking, and we find out that this older good looking man who is kind of staring at Catherine is none other than General Tilney, who is the father of Eleanor and Henry. So we have kind of dear old dad watching as these two are dancing, and it's kind of, he's definitely taking an interest. These two, after the dance, start kind of chatting. Again, we're getting closer with with Eleanor a little bit, and Eleanor decides that she is going to come over the next day to go for a walk with Catherine. And so Catherine's really excited. They all eventually go home, and Catherine cannot wait for the walk with Eleanor. The very next day, when it's set for their walk, it's overcast, and then it absolutely starts pouring. And again, remember, Catherine, she doesn't really mind the rain, she doesn't really mind the mud, but she is kind of worried, is Eleanor still gonna come over when it's raining? And not only is she's waiting patiently for her new friend, when who is going to show up but the trio, who absolutely need Catherine to come with them because they're going to go to this mysterious castle that is nearby, this Gothic ruins. And Catherine, you love Gothic novels so much, of course you want to go see this ancient ruin, which, side note, the ancient ruin that they're talking about at the time of this is not very ancient. It's not very old at all. So they kind of talk about being this oldest, most haunted place in all of England. And if at the time, that would be kind of a joke with the reader, because the reader would know that this ruin that they're seeing is not all that old. Catherine is pretty firm that she is waiting for Eleanor, and she has a prior engagement. But the Thorpes decide to say, no, we saw her on the way up, and she's not coming. We talked to her, she's not coming, nobody's coming out in this. So eventually Catherine decides that she's going to kind of get in the carriage and go with them. And on the way out, who does she see but Eleanor and Henry walking over to go and say hi to Catherine. So Catherine is yelling at John to stop, but he of course doesn't. And she is very upset because the Thorpes had the audacity to lie to her about these, and now Catherine looks like she is a bad friend. Catherine looks like she is kind of double booking herself and seen as flaky, and Catherine is really not happy about this. The Thorpes, though, are kind of like, hey, get over it. Eventually, it's so rainy and so muddy that they have to turn around anyway because it is too wet to go to see the castle. So the castle wasn't even seen for all that. And Catherine's really upset about having snubbed her new friend to kind of go hang out with this man that she doesn't really want to hang out with. She didn't really even get to take time with her sister or her friend and her brother, and all around the outing was a bust. She decides the very next day that she's going to go over to the Tilney household to apologize, and when she gets there, a servant meets her at the door and says that they're going to go ahead and see if Eleanor is home, and when she the servant comes back, the servant tells Catherine that no, they're not at home. So Catherine starts to walk away, but then once she's down a little ways, she sees that Eleanor is on a walk with her dad. They both decide to leave the house at the same time. So Catherine's really like, oh my goodness, I must have hurt Eleanor's feelings so much that she told the servant to turn me away, even though she really was home, because I just saw her leaving the house with her dad, going for a casual walk. They're very clearly not going anywhere. And so Catherine feels even worse now. Later, we're back at another event. I swear to God, these people never take a moment to themselves. We're back at the theater, and Henry Tilney sees Catherine at the theater, and he kind of bows to her, but he does so kind of coldly, and she's like, wow, I really offended all of these people. But later in the day, she's talking, and she sees John Thorpe talking with the General Tilney, and she's a little bit intrigued that they are oh so close. And later, Catherine is able to explain to these two about the mishap, and all seems to be forgiven, and General Tilney decides to come over and speak to her as well. And General Tilney is being very complimentary to Catherine, which is a little bit interesting, because she didn't really expect such a big, powerful man to take an interest in her and be so friendly with her. So she's kind of intrigued as to why this powerful man would even be talking to her, much less being so nice. And she decides that all the Tilneys must be absolutely fantastic because not only do they have a lot of money, but Mr. Tilney is being very kind to her, kind of more so than usual. Another important thing with Mr. Tilney is anytime he is around, his children kind of tense up. It seems like all the joy has been sucked out of the room. They suddenly become very kind of proper and well behaved, much less casual. It feels like anytime he's around, they're very afraid of putting a toe out of line, which is a little bit of an important thing for later. Again, the trio decide that they're going to hang out with Catherine, and Catherine now puts her foot down and she says, no, I have plans with Eleanor Tilney. You guys need to back off. They try to lie and say that they went and saw Eleanor and told her that she already had plans, and Catherine, instead of going with them, she gets really, really upset and she decides to run after Eleanor and go to the Tilney house. She kind of shows up to the Tilneys uninvited and is apologizing profusely, saying that John had no right to tell them what they did and that he is lying and that she would love to hang out with them. And while she's there, Mr. Tilney shows up. General Tilney says, hey, why don't you stay for dinner? And Catherine says, well, I can't now because, honestly, Mrs. Allen doesn't even know I'm here. I would love to hang out with you another time. And so we are starting to see that the Tilneys and Catherine are getting closer, and there is a bit of a wedge happening with Catherine and the original quartet. Gets home and she's talking with Mrs. Allen, and Mrs. Allen is saying, oh, it's good that you didn't go on this trip because it's bad for you all to be seen unchaperoned. And Catherine says, hey, why didn't you warn me earlier? I would never have hung out with them in the first place if it was seen as inappropriate for me to hanging out with some of these boys unchaperoned. And Mrs. Allen kind of says, well, kids are going to be kids, and I didn't want to be the stick in the mud, but really you shouldn't be going anywhere with any man without a chaperone. So we're starting to see Catherine, who she's a little bit mad that she is been taken advantage of and is kind of being seen as behaving inappropriately when nobody has kind of warned her otherwise. She doesn't really know the rules of society, and she's expecting on everyone to be dealing with her fairly and telling her the rules, and she's starting to see that this is not the case and that maybe she's being taken advantage of both by the Thorpes, but also by Mrs. and Mr. Allen, because they're not really telling her the proper way to behave. Finally, we get the long-awaited walk with the Tilneys. While they're there, they're discussing the merits of novels, and Catherine is kind of talking with Eleanor and Henry about novels, and we learn that Eleanor doesn't really like novels. She's read them, but what she prefers are histories. What she prefers are philosophy. She prefers the manly books, quote unquote, which is kind of shocking to Catherine, because Catherine can't imagine why anyone would enjoy those things when there are things like Gothic novels. She decides to talk to Henry Tilney, and she is kind of assuming that he is going to be like John here, who kind of disparages novels. And Henry says that he actually loves novels, and that they are some of his favorite things to read. He reads other things as well. but that he is a man who is very open about enjoying Gothic novels as well. But in typical Henry Tilney fashion, he starts poking fun at Catherine and at women as a whole, and Eleanor kind of steps in and calls him on his bullshit and says, hey, Catherine, he is joking and he doesn't know how far to take it. I promise you he doesn't hate women. I promise you he is not meaning to make fun of you, but that he is kind of talking about things as a whole, and my stupid brother doesn't really know when to stop making a joke. And Catherine kind of brushes it off as well. And she says that she's not really offended. And so these three kind of grow closer. Henry likes that he has someone who can take a joke, even when he goes too far. Eleanor is someone who is very well balanced and kind of calls her brother on his shit. And Catherine just likes the easy friendship, the easy discussions here. She does note that sometimes these two talk about things like beyond just books, and they talk about things that she doesn't really know much about. They talk about art, they talk about the way that things are kind of arranged to be artful, and these are things that being someone who doesn't have as much money, being someone who isn't educated in those things, she can't really add to the discussion, but she's kind of happy to be included even if she doesn't know much on some of these things. She is very intellectually stimulated by being around company who does more than just gossip and does more than just kind of talk about the latest fashions. And they can talk about the latest fashions and they can gossip, but then they also talk about philosophical things, talk about the deeper meanings of life. And she is very, very refreshed by being around such people who are engaging her intellectually as well as socially, and who are seemingly so balanced in their takes and aren't really necessarily strictly adhering to the rules of society when it comes to what is manly and what is feminine, but we have a woman who engages in kind of more manly pursuits, and we have a man who is okay with admitting the parts that are things seen as feminine that he enjoys, and he openly enjoys things, and isn't just someone who is sticking with his gendered lane, but he is okay being seen as the guy who likes feminine things. We have these two people who are kind of radical and very refreshing for Catherine, and she really admires these two. The Tilneys are very, very interesting and very radical for the time period. The very next day, Catherine gets an apology note from Isabella saying that she feels bad that she was so angry with Catherine for leaving her on the road trip, and that she didn't mean some of the nasty things that she said to Catherine. Once again, on the road trip, they never made it to the castle, so nobody has gotten to see this big fancy Gothic ruin, but that's okay because Isabella and James are desperately in love. Not only is she in love with James, but Isabella reveals that these two have secretly gotten engaged, and she cannot imagine being with anyone else. And Catherine kind of notes that, like, hey, this seems to be happening a little bit quickly, and maybe Isabella is laying things on a little too thick. Isabella talks about how she would marry James even if he didn't have a single penny to his name, and that she is just really happy that this is a true love match, and it wouldn't matter if James had no money. She would marry him 1,000 times over. And Catherine feels like Isabella's laying it on a little bit thick, but she is saying, well, that's good. I'm glad that you love my brother. I'm glad that you guys are going to get married. And Isabella is kind of worried about what Mr. and Mrs. Moreland are going to say. James is going to have to ask them for permission to get married. Two people, especially of social standing, don't just get engaged. There is kind of a song and dance of the approval of both parents, etc., that need to happen. It's not just like a guy gets on one knee and suddenly if she says yes, they are together. There is kind of the requisite social dance and requisite discussions of dowries, discussions of inheritance, discussions of places to live and how much money you are going to get a year in order to sustain the marriage, things like that. So Isabella is waiting with bated breath to hear from James what the parents have said. And Catherine is kind of assuring Isabella that there's no way that the parents will say no. If James is truly in love with Isabella, then there will be nothing that will keep them apart. And this turns out to be the case. So the Thorpes are really excited that the Morlands, the family is going to be connected. And John decides that he is going to go out of town. So while James is going to leave, now that these two are kind of the proto-engaged, right? They're not really public about the engagement, but the families approve at this point. They still need to talk about the money aspect of things, but for all intents and purposes, these two are engaged, even if it's not announced to the world yet. James decides to go off, and John also leaves. And so now we just have the girls still here in Bath with the Allens. When John leaves, he kind of hints to Catherine that he is going to be returning with a ring himself, and that the typically once you go to one wedding, other weddings tend to follow. Some of these things kind of go over Catherine's head, and she is just kind of nodding and agreeing when he says, oh, I'm gonna come back with a ring. She says, oh, well, I hope that you do. And when he says, well, one marriage may follow another, she says, oh, I've heard that saying. And so we kind of see here that Catherine isn't really picking up on the hints that maybe John will be proposing to her. Catherine then afterwards goes over to dinner with the Tilneys, and again we kind of start to see that whenever General Tilney is in the room, it seems like he is a happiness suck. These two are very engaged when it's just the three of them alone, but as soon as General Tilney is in the mix, it seems like they are extremely buttoned up, that they aren't really talkative, that they don't really put a toe at a line, and Catherine can't really seem to understand why. Every time she's hung out with General Tilney, he's been really nice to her, and she doesn't really understand why her friends are acting so strange when in the company of their dad, especially because for all intents and purposes, the dad seems extremely nice, extremely complimentary. So why on earth are my friends acting completely differently when he's around? Later, Catherine is talking to Isabella about this behavior, and Isabella insults all the Tilneys and how her brother is so much better than the Tilneys. And don't you agree, Catherine? And Catherine can't really admit that she likes the brother, so she's kind of dancing around the topic. They all go to a ball, and Isabella assures Catherine that at the ball she is going to stand there quietly all night because she couldn't dance with anyone other than James, and now that James is not here to dance with her, she is going to be a wallflower all night. Catherine is thinking that Isabella's laying it on a little bit thick, so she is going to go and hang out with the Tilneys. They're talking, they're dancing, they're having a good old time, and we have a new Tilney in the mix. His name is Captain Tilney, and this is the older brother and the heir to the Tilney fortune when dear old dad eventually passes away. And Captain Tilney is in the military, and Captain Tilney is talking with Catherine and saying, hey, I see your friend there, Isabella. She is beautiful. Would she dance with me? And Catherine tells Captain Tilney that, hey, you're wasting your time. She won't say yes to you. She won't be dancing this evening. Captain Tilney is not afraid of a challenge, and he decides to walk off. And Henry is kind of laughing about this exchange. And Catherine doesn't really get the joke. And soon enough, while these two are dancing, she sees that Captain Tilney is dancing with Isabella. And she is a little bit put off by this. Later in the aftermath of the dancing here, Catherine kind of talks to Isabella about the dancing, and Isabella is talking about how, oh, well, it would have been rude if I said no to Mr. Tilney, but don't worry, I don't like Captain Tilney, and your brother is so much more handsome than the Mr. Tilney. I only accepted the dance because it would be rude not to. While they are talking, Catherine does talk to Isabella as well, and Isabella finds out that they have heard the news from the Morlands about how much money they're going to get, and it is not a lot. Isabella is talking about how she cannot believe that the Morlands are being so stingy. Catherine says, my parents would be giving as much as they can, and Isabella says, surely they could give more. They must not really like me. And also they're making us wait 3 years to get married. We can't get married tomorrow. It has such a long engagement, and so clearly your parents must not like me, but it doesn't matter. I will wait 1,000 years, and even if I don't get any money, I will still marry your brother because I'm so in love with him. The Allens have been in Bath with Catherine for about 6 weeks, and like any good trip, eventually it needs to come to an end, and the Allens are starting to get tired of Bath, and they're starting to think about wanting to go home. Catherine is kind of this potential going back home is looming, and she's thinking about James and thinking about the upcoming engagement here. Her mind is pretty full with all of the events that have happened. She also finds out that the Tilneys are going to go home as well soon here, and the Tilneys have made Catherine an offer of, if we're going home, we're getting sick of Bath, I know that the Allens are getting sick of Bath, how about you come hang out with us at our home, Northanger Abbey. So we finally get the title of the story, and Catherine is thrilled about this invitation, and so she decides that she is going to accept. She has gotten permission from the Allens and her parents, and so when the Allens go home, she is not going to be going home with them. She is going to be in the care of the Tilneys, staying at their home for a little bit. The Moreland home is so far from the Abbey. It's going to be nice to hang out with her new friends in their home, and that is very gracious of General Tilney to invite them. She discusses this with Isabella and how she's so excited to go to the Abbey, and Isabella is kind of talking with Catherine, and Catherine is imagining Northanger Abbey as this big, spooky, Gothic home. She has never been to an abbey. She's read about abbeys in her Gothic novels, so clearly Northanger Abbey must be haunted. It must have sliding walls. It must have secret passageways. It must have relatives sequestered away, somebody locked up in a dungeon. It's gotta be horrifying, and she's really excited to get to go. And Isabella is kind of trashing the Tilneys in Isabella's way. The two decide that they're going to write. As they're waiting for their trip to go, Catherine is watching her friend Isabella, and she is noticing that every time Isabella is hanging out in public, she is spending more and more time with Captain Tilney. And Catherine is a little bit distressed about this. She is thinking that Isabella is leading Captain Tilney on when Isabella is secretly engaged. Nobody knows that they're engaged, but it's all but official. They're dancing all night. They are spending any real second together. Again, it's kind of this unchaperoned behavior as well. And so as Catherine is starting to learn some of the rules from the Allens and is starting to kind of look down at the behavior of Isabella, especially when Isabella is not a single girl really anymore. She starts speaking to Henry about this. Henry kind of laughs it off. He kind of talks about how, well, Isabella's gonna do what Isabella's gonna do, and oh, don't worry, my brother is about to be called back to his regiment, and so yes, we're going to leave Captain Tilney and Isabella alone here in Bath, but really, what could happen, because it's not going to be very long before he has to come back anyway. He's just on his quick little leave of absence. And so how much mischief could the two really get into without us here? I would just put it from your mind. Eventually, this will all be water under the bridge. Henry is talking a little bit about how men and women should behave when they are together, and really no man should be threatened if his girl is seen as attractive and seen as wanted by other men. Kind of a true man loves it when his girlfriend, when his fiance, when his wife is seen as desirable by other men. The only way a man would be offended by his hot wife getting attention from someone else is if she is behaving inappropriately with those men. A true guy doesn't really care when a girl is attractive, seen as attractive, when other guys are flirting with their girl. It really only becomes a problem when the girl is flirting back. Is Catherine really upset about Captain Tilney pursuing Isabella, or is Catherine upset that Isabella is flirting with Mr. Tilney? He thinks that, hey, well, if James is a good dude, then he knows his girl's fine. He knows that she is attractive to other men, and it's only really a problem if other people are admiring her, if she is admiring them back. It's finally time to go off to Northanger Abbey. They have breakfast and then they leave. And General Tilney is pretty snappish on the way. He is very concerned about the timetable and very concerned about making sure that they get there on time. And he's being kind of rude to the servants, which Catherine's the first time that she's seen anything besides like the best behavior. On the way, Catherine is talking to Henry, and she is talking about how, oh, it must be so dreadful and exciting to be living in such a Gothic in such a Gothic home. And Henry's kind of teasing her right back, and he says, you know, the Abbey is exactly what you would imagine in a Gothic novel. It has all of the kind of horrors of a Gothic novel, and truly you are so brave for coming here, because you must know that when you do come here, that it will seem like it's a normal home, but then one of the days that it will be there, you'll find a hidden passageway, you will find some decrepit old man living in the walls. There will be something fantastical for you to discover here. It is exactly like you would think in one of your Gothic tales, and Catherine is getting her imagination ramped up and up and up to go ahead and see Northanger Abbey. When they eventually do get to the Abbey, she notices that it doesn't quite seem spooky. Actually, when they go inside, it seems pretty nice. And she doesn't have much time to kind of admire these furnishings, though, because Eleanor comes up and says, hey, it's time for dinner. Dad's really nervous about the time. We need to make sure that we are down here, so don't change clothes very much. Freshen yourself up, and then we're gonna have dinner. When she is freshening herself up in the room, she notices that it's not creepy at all. Actually, it looks kind of swanky, but she does notice that there are some things around. There's a big heavy chest. There's a big thing of drawers that are locked, and so she's very intrigued by some of these things here. She tries to kind of open them, look for these secret passageways that maybe Henry Tilney was talking about, but she's realizing that she's running out of time. Eleanor is kind of being like, hey girl, like, dear old dad really means it, we need to go downstairs. So she goes downstairs and they have kind of dinner. As they're having dinner, there is a storm raging outside, and so even though it's very nice, it is still kind of that spooky Gothic horror of the cracking of thunder, etc. So it does kind of play into those Gothic fantasies that Catherine has there. As they're talking about dinner, Catherine realizes that this room is huge, and General Tilney is kind of talking with Catherine and is apologizing for the state of his room here and how she must be used to much grander dining rooms, especially with her time with the Allens. And Catherine says, actually, no, this is the nicest room I have ever been in. And General Tilney seems to puff up at that. He is a little bit confused that she is saying that this is the grandest room that she's ever been in, but he ultimately seems very flattered. We start to see that General Tilney really cares about material things. He really cares about the furniture. He really cares about his home. He's very puffed up about this, and at the time period that would be seen as kind of something that women would be interested in. Women are caring about the furnishings of the home, and so this kind of sets General Tilney apart. And it's a little interesting that his children kind of have adopted this as well, of finding things and enjoying things not just because they are gendered, but enjoying things because they truly enjoy them, and kind of trialing things and not being afraid to dabble with things that are seen as too masculine for women or too feminine for men. So that is something that we notice about General Tilney, is he cares a lot about the trappings of his home, about the furnishing, and this is different than most stereotypical men at the time. Caring about your home is a woman's thing, so that's an interesting little tidbit here. Eventually, dinner is a little bit of a stilted affair here. Again, the siblings are not very talkative, not very friendly when dear old dad is there. And she eventually decides to go off into her room, and just like she was worried about in the way over here, the thunder and the rain and the storming really makes the whole room a little bit spooky. And at night, she decides that she is going to be digging around and looking for things, and eventually she is looking in some of the drawers. She gets some things opened, and everything is kind of letting her down, and it is not really anything to speak of. But eventually she finds one drawer, and inside it are these papers, and she is very intrigued that there are these old hidden papers that were locked in this drawer, and that it must be that these are something horrifying. But unfortunately, it is too dark for her to read it. Her candle has blown out, and she spends the night worried and thinking about the storm, thinking about the rain, and imagining all the horrifying secrets that must be in this Northanger Abbey. The next day, Catherine wakes up, and the first thing she does is go and investigate these papers she found. Now, now that it is morning and she can read them. And she's very sad to see that these seem to be a laundry list. It seems to be a list of things that need to be cleaned, probably from someone who stayed here before. It's discussions of like shirts that need to be washed and starched, trousers. It's very clearly a man's list of things for a servant to clean. And so Catherine's a little bummed out that it's not some secret, horrifying tale, that it is actually just something extremely boring and mundane. When she comes down, she's waiting for everyone else to wake up, and Henry's there, and these two start talking about flowers. It's very clear as well that Henry cares about flowers, and Catherine has learned more about them from Eleanor, and so they're discussing. Again, we have a man who is not afraid to like things that are seen as feminine. We have a guy who is likes things for the purpose of liking things. He doesn't really care if it is seen as masculine or feminine. He is going to enjoy the things that he likes. Eventually the others wake up too, and General Tilney decides that he is going to take Catherine on a tour of his home. And as he goes into various different rooms, again, we're seeing that they are very fashionable, that they're very well done. General Tilney has spent a lot of money refurnishing this home. This place maybe used to be something like a Gothic novel, but the more and more that she sees, the more that she realizes that this place is very nice. It has been renovated. He has spent a lot of money renovating it, getting new furniture, making sure that it is in tip-top shape. And so as we are seeing more and more of Northanger Abbey, she is realizing that it might not be as spooky. And so we start to see Catherine as she is viewing Northanger Abbey less and less like something out of a Gothic novel and more like a really nice ritzy place that she is getting to spend time in. But there are certain rooms that she is not able to see. One of them is the wing that Mrs. Tilney used to have when she was alive. And remember, Mrs. Tilney is dead. So it's a little interesting to Catherine that she is not able to see her rooms, that she hasn't seen a single portrait of this woman. And so even though the Abbey is seen more and more of a nice place to be and less like this Gothic tale, there is still something in the back of her mind that Catherine thinks is a little bit interesting, because why hasn't she heard much about dearly departed Mrs. Tilney? This is kind of made even further when these two are on a walk, and General Tilney is advising that Eleanor and Catherine don't go down a certain way, and Eleanor says that path that they were going to go down was her mom's favorite path. And so Catherine starts to talk to Eleanor and is a little intrigued that General Tilney is not letting her see the mother's portrait. General Tilney is not letting her. It seems like there is nothing of his dead wife in the home. All of these are kind of making Catherine realize that maybe General Tilney is a bit of a Gothic villain, and that maybe the death of Eleanor and Henry and Captain Tilney's mother might be suspicious. What is General Tilney hiding? Why is there seemingly no trace of his wife left in the home? Why is everything renovated? Why is there no pictures of her? These are all things that are going around in Catherine's mind. So even though the place doesn't look like a Gothic novel, she still is thinking that in a place like Northanger Abbey, surely he is a Gothic villain. In fact, the more that time passes, the more that she is convinced that he is evil. He spends quite a bit of time by himself. He seems to be up very late at night. Surely he must be hiding something. Surely there must be these secret passageways that Henry Tilney was talking about earlier. Henry Tilney couldn't have been joking. There must be some deep, dark secret inside the heart of Northanger Abbey, and Catherine is going to find out what it is. And so Catherine kind of goes off exploring. She goes looking for these secret passageways whenever she can. She goes, and even though she hasn't found anything yet, she is convinced that there is something that the general is hiding. One day, Eleanor takes Catherine up to see a portrait of her mother. This is something Catherine has been increasingly interested in their past there. So Eleanor decides to show her a picture of the mother, and as soon as they come down, General Tilney yells at Eleanor. Catherine is startled. Catherine runs away, but this just confirms that General Tilney must be evil and there must be some deep, dark secret with the mom. One day, Catherine goes off to explore the old Miss Tilney rooms for herself. And so she goes through and she sees the rooms that are kind of off limits. And when she leaves, she starts to go down the staircase. And who does she run into but Henry? And Henry's a little confused to see her here. These are not the stairs that you would be using. What are you doing here? And Catherine says that she was intrigued and she wanted to learn more about the mother. And oh, by the way, I heard from Eleanor that Eleanor was not present when your mother died, and that she died rather suddenly. And Henry kind of bristles at this. He says, no, my sister was not at home when she died, but I was and my brother was, and yes, my mom died suddenly, but she had been sick for years. And so what are you insinuating? You seem to be saying that my dad had some sort of nefarious scheme, that either he refused to treat her when she was ill or that he killed her himself. And let me tell you, she died of natural causes, and my brother and I were here, and no, Eleanor couldn't be here, and yes, it was sudden, but she had been sick for years, and this eventually was just the final seizure that killed her. He is a little bit angry that Catherine had been thinking such horrible things about his dad. He says, yes, maybe my dad and I don't see eye to eye all the time, but I cannot believe that you would think that we would be the kinds of people who would kill a poor innocent woman like my mom. And I was joking with you about liking Gothic novels so much, but really the more that I'm seeing, the more I'm seeing that really your head is too much in these things. If you are the kind of person who's jumping to these conclusions and is jumping to kind of these things, then maybe you aren't the person that I thought you were. And he is kind of shaming Catherine for these beliefs. And eventually Catherine goes down and she is crying about this, and she feels really ashamed that she let her imagination get the better of her, and that she has kind of that he has kind of seen her in this light, that he has seen her now as kind of silly, as frivolous. She always knew that she wasn't quite as educated as the Tilneys, and now she has kind of proven it to Henry Tilney, so she is not really happy about this, and she feels really bad that forever thinking that there was something nefarious going on, and that General Tilney murdered his wife. She has a bit of an epiphany and realizes that she has been reading too much into these novels, and that they've kind of filled her head with things, and she's expecting Henry to never speak to her again. But actually what she finds is, now that they've had this bit of a fight, now that he's kind of talked to her, he's actually more attentive and nice to her than usual. He is kind of discussing with her, he's paying her attention, and so she feels a little bit better because she was worried that this would have ruined the budding friendship here with these two, and how having him kind of have his eyes opened has started to make them grow a little bit closer, even in sort of a strange way. And Catherine is she didn't really expect this, but she's very happy about this development, and she is kind of decided that she's not going to read so much into Gothic novels. Maybe she should take Eleanor's advice and read other things, and maybe some of the things that she has read isn't really truly the way that things are. She decides that the new thing that's going to kind of be in her head and be in her mind, instead of trying to find out the horrible schemes of General Tilney murdering his wife, is she's realizing that she hasn't heard anything from Isabella, and she is worried about things that have gone on maybe with Captain Tilney. She hasn't heard any news. Isabella promised to write to her, and she hasn't heard anything. Finally, after having said that she hasn't heard anything, Henry Tilney says that she finally has a letter, and he kind of jokes with her about giving her this letter. They have this kind of cute little banter where he's excited to give her the letter. She opens it, reads it, and she starts crying at the table. And you can tell that these two are really afraid for her. Henry especially is very attentive. The general hasn't noticed that she is crying at the table, but these two make it very easy for her to excuse herself, to kind of calm down, and then later she joins them later in the drawing room after she has kind of calmed down, and these two immediately, you can tell, they are very concerned for her. Henry is already apologetic. He's like, hey, I wouldn't have joked with you about getting you the letter if I had known that it was going to cause you so much distress. Would you mind telling me what's in the letter? Like, I hope that you're okay. And Catherine regales to the Tilneys that the letter is from James, and James has broken off the engagement with Isabella. James is absolutely heartbroken because he has heard that Isabella has formed an inappropriate attachment with none other than Captain Tilney, and that she has kind of shamed him. He is no longer going to marry her, and he is absolutely heartbroken by this news that they've broken up. And so Catherine is also very sad about the news, and these two kind of are taking Catherine's side a little bit against their brother. They're saying that their brother was behaving badly, that they cannot believe that he would do this, especially to her brother, and that they are apologizing for having maybe made light of the situation. Especially Henry is apologizing for maybe having made light of the fact that these two were together, especially because it seems like Captain Tilney may have a bit of a reputation. And they assure Catherine that Isabella maybe bit off more than she can chew, because this might not be the first time that the brother has done something like this. And they are pretty clear to her that even if these two were in love, that the general would never let the captain marry someone like Isabella. So do not worry, she will not be married to us. And Eleanor kind of says that, hey, I hope that you don't think the actions of my elder brother would be the same actions as my older brother here. Henry is nothing like his older brother, and I am sorry that my older brother had a part in your distress and the distress of your brother. No one really hears anything from Isabella or from Captain Tilney, and so Catherine is a little bit intrigued that there isn't any sort of engagement. There hasn't been any news from Isabella. There hasn't been any news from dear old dad about any sort of engagement happening, and so it's looking more and more like the Tilneys were correct, that maybe older brother had no intentions of ever marrying Isabella, and dear old dad certainly doesn't seem to know anything about it. One thing to mention is every once in a while, Henry Tilney has had to go back home to his home in Woodston. Like we said, he has a job, he is a clergyman, so every once in a while in this stay, he has kind of been in and out a little bit. So there are times when he is away and there are times that he is here, and General Tilney has decided that the group of them are going to pay a visit to Woodston, and he assures Henry that, oh, you don't need to prepare anything for our arrival. I don't need a big fancy feast. I don't need anything big. And so Catherine is really excited that she is going to get to see Woodston and Henry Tilney's home, but she's a little bit sad when immediately after the dad has said that he is going to pay a visit in a few days, Henry immediately whisks away to go ahead and prepare, and she kind of assures Henry, oh no, your dad said that you don't need to prepare anything, and he kind of alludes to, you don't know my dad. He maybe says that we don't need to prepare, but I need to make sure that things are nice and for his arrival. So Henry Tilney leaves, and he is excited for them to come and visit. When they do eventually go the whole ride over, General Tilney is talking about how grand Woodston is and talking it up. And sure enough, when she goes, it's this small cottage, but it is charming. It seems like it's very well decorated. Henry has pulled out all the stops when it comes to the food, and even though some of it isn't quite to General Tilney's taste, it is a huge feast. You can tell that everyone put all the stops into General Tilney coming over. The home is cleaned, there is more food than can manage, and General Tilney still finds ways to criticize things, but Catherine is kind of defending Henry and defending this home, and is saying how beautiful this home is and how it's absolutely lovely, and that one day a woman will come and that there isn't even much that needs to happen in this home. It's already so far above any of her expectations, and General Tilney is kind of alluding in this that maybe one day Catherine will be the woman who comes to this home, and this kind of makes Catherine fairly happy, especially when the siblings were kind of talking about how strict he is with who his children will marry, but she hasn't seen anything like that, because he's been nothing but kind to her. Even if sometimes he snubs his children, he has been very, very gracious to Catherine, even though she doesn't have a lot of money. And so she is not really seeing what these two have been saying about some of the things about their dad and his need for wealth when it comes to who his children will marry. Eventually, they return home to Northanger Abbey, and Catherine gets a note from Isabella, and this note is saying that Isabella has going to Catherine saying, I've made a mistake. Your brother has misinterpreted things. I think he thinks that we're over. Can you please write to your brother? I am still absolutely in love with your brother. There has been nothing inappropriate with Captain Tilney, and please write to your brother and tell him that I love him. You will not believe all of the things that people are saying. I cannot stand Captain Tilney. He has been spreading rumors about me that we have an attachment, but that's not the case, and this would all be cleared up if you would pretty please tell your brother James that I love him, and pretty please, I think that he has called off our engagement, and you need to set him right, and you need to make sure that he still marries me because he is the love of my life and I have never strayed. And Catherine is kind of reading this letter and realizing that no, what must have happened is that Captain Tilney decided not to marry Isabella, and Isabella had been looking for more money, had been looking for a bigger fish to get married to, because the Tilneys have so much money, and Captain Tilney is the heir to Northanger Abbey when General Tilney eventually dies. And either Captain Tilney wrote to General Tilney and General Tilney did not let them get married, or what it seems like is Captain Tilney never had any intention of marrying Isabella and had enjoyed the flirtation, but now has left and is leaving Isabella a little bit ruined. And Catherine kind of starts to see that Isabella maybe got her just desserts, and that maybe she should have seen this coming and not flirted so inappropriately, and she has decided that she is not going to write Isabella back. This is my own piece here. As a person reading this now, I don't really like that Catherine did this, but at the time, that is something that the readers would probably likely see as the best course of action, since we have been seeing Isabella as so nasty every once in a while. Maybe this is something that a reader back then would think, yes, Isabella's getting her comeuppance. As a modern reader, I don't really like this because it's very clear that Isabella, though she has not behaved the most appropriately, she is still kind of a victim in this scenario, in my opinion. But that's me as a modern reader coming in, and that's very much not in the text. In the text, we are likely supposed to see that this is a good thing. General Tilney has to go out of town for a little bit, and it is now something that it is the Eleanor and Henry have kind of the run of Northanger Abbey, and she notices how much happier these two are when the general is not around. He again is that joy suck, and these two, when it's just the three of them, they're having a grand old time. So much so that Catherine starts to think, hey, am I overstaying my welcome? And Eleanor assures her, no, please, I love hanging out with you. You are absolutely my best friend. You could never run out your welcome. In fact, you should probably tell your parents that you're going to stay even longer if that's something that you want, because I'm so happy to have another girl around. You make it bearable whenever Henry is out. I love hanging out with Henry, but he can't be here all the time, and you just make my life so much happier. I'm so happy that you're my friend. And Eleanor is very clear with the fact that she is really, really friends with Catherine, and that it is a very true, pure friendship, which is a bit of a contrast to kind of how these two were, the cattiness of their friendship. These two seem to have a good friendship built on understanding, built on learning, built on kind of mutual respect and trust. As things are going on too, she starts to realize that, hey, I like Henry, Henry seems to like me. So Catherine is kind of getting her hopes up that maybe one day these two will get married. She is infatuated with Henry. Henry seems to like her back. They are not really flirty necessarily, but they have a really, really good time in each other's company. They are kind of close friends, kind of confidants. He cares for her. Earlier we had seen how he was distressed by her distress when she got the news from her brother. And so this seems to be a very true romance built in friendship here. He hasn't really expressed that outright, but there are kind of those little tells, and dear old dad seems to be quite enjoyable, or seems to quite like the fact that these two maybe one day would be together. One day, however, Henry is back in his house in Woodston. Eleanor and Catherine are hanging out, and dear old dad comes home in a rush, and he immediately talks to Eleanor. It is late at night, and Catherine is a little bit confused. She's wondering why this would be such a rush, why he'd be coming home. And then Eleanor knocks on Catherine's door, and she's very clearly upset. And she says, hey, I hate to do this to you, especially when the other day I said you could stay as long as you wanted, but my dad has let me know that we forgot we had an engagement, and on Monday we need to be out of the house. And Catherine says, oh, well, that's no worries. Of course, if you had something going on, of course you have to honor that. Of course you have to be a good person and honor your engagements. I'll make sure that when you guys leave on Monday that I'll be gone too. And Eleanor says, no, my dad says that you need to leave tomorrow morning. You have essentially, it's late at night. You need to be packing. You cannot be sleeping. You need to leave here first thing early in the morning. And actually, you're not going to get a chaperone, and you are not going to get any sort of protection for this long journey home. My dad is essentially kicking you out, and I hate that we have to do this to you. And Catherine is really upset. She kind of puts on a brave face for Eleanor, but then when Eleanor leaves, she is crying. She cannot believe what maybe had happened. This is not something that is acceptable by any stretch of the imagination, to be a young woman kicked out of a house, forced to journey alone. That is absolutely unheard of. Surely Catherine must have done something horribly wrong, that she's really upset about it. All night she's kind of crying. The next day Eleanor comes and is helping her pack. She's basically saying, my dad said that I'm not supposed to write you any letters, but please, I don't care what my dad says. You have to tell me when you get home safe. I'm not going to be able to rest until I know that you got home safe. And Catherine says, well, you can't disobey your dad, so I won't be writing you, but just know that you are one of my close friends. And Eleanor says, I don't care if my dad says that I can't write, or that you can't write me. I will be writing you. I treasure this friendship, and I am really sorry. It is time for her to go. She is stuck on the back of the post carriage, so she's not even getting like a proper carriage. They are sending her out like she is a letter. She has nobody, she has no protection. Anything could happen on this trail, and she is crying as she is on the back of this post carriage. They're on the path to Woodston. She's thinking about her actions, and she's worried about what could have possibly happened to have been so offensive to General Tilney that he would kick me out. And the only thing that she can possibly think of is the fact that she thought that General Tilney had murdered his wife, but surely Henry Tilney wouldn't have said anything to his dad. That happened so long ago. But the more that she's thinking about it, and the more that she's ruminating, again, this is a really long journey, the more that she realizes that this must be the only explanation. I thought that Henry Tilney had liked me, but all that I'd ever seen is General Tilney being kind. So it must be that Henry Tilney did not like me and told his dad, and his dad was so offended that he kicked me out. Her family doesn't know that this is happening. There was no time to let anyone know. There was no letter sent ahead of time. No one knows that she is essentially on this journey. It's very dangerous. Anything could happen. And the whole way she is worried for her safety, and how could she have gotten things so wrong? In the past in the story, it was very clear that she had misinterpreted things, but she was so sure of his feelings and of Eleanor's friendship, and she is kind of wondering how she could have been so wrong about this, and grieving the life that she thought maybe she was going to have. Again, she was kind of thinking that maybe one day Henry would propose to her, and now that kind of those dreams are dashed. Eventually, Catherine arrives back home, and her parents are extremely confused that she has been kicked out, but that they are ultimately just happy she's home, that she's safe. The parents essentially think that it was quite strange that General Tilney had done this. Clearly he acted in a way that was ungentlemanly, but they aren't really throwing any ill will or blame towards General Tilney, but they also aren't really putting any ill will or blame towards Catherine. The whole thing they've kind of brushed off, much like how they kind of let Catherine run amok in the beginning, much like how they didn't seem overly concerned about making sure that she knew the rules, but were more concerned about the weather. It seems like maybe some of their priorities aren't quite in order, and they're mostly just grateful that she is home. The next day, they kind of start going through business as usual, and Mrs. Moreland doesn't really understand why Catherine is still so upset. She's still sad about the loss of the friendship, and Mrs. Moreland doesn't really understand why Catherine is still thinking about this, because she got home safely, nothing wrong happened, and she should be able to kind of brush this off and put things behind her. But Catherine is increasingly depressed and sad. Miss Moreland, being kind of the naive but generally good mother that she is, decides that they're going to go next door to the Allen home because clearly some company would make Catherine happy. So they go over to Mr. and Mrs. Allen's place and they tell the whole tale of Catherine and her journey. And again, Mr. and Mrs. Allen agree that the way that General Tilney behaved was ungentlemanly, and they are so sorry that that happened. But then they move on to discussing other things. Mrs. Allen is talking about fashion yet again, and it seems like all of the adults here have kind of brushed this off as like one silly misadventure, and they're just happy that nothing bad happened from it. And they're kind of confused as to why Catherine is so affected by this. We finally are getting to chapter 30, and Catherine is still thinking about this encounter, and Miss Moreland, now she's getting frustrated, and she decides that she is going to go upstairs and give her daughter something important to read, some essays that are going to kind of fill her mind because her daughter is too depressed and ruminating, and she clearly needs to have her mental faculties elsewhere, and so she is going to be right back, and she's going to come back with some treatises and essays on how young women should behave. When dear old mom is upstairs, there is a visitor who comes to the door, and sure enough, it is Henry Tilney. And mother is a little bit confused as to why Mr. Tilney is here, but they let him in anyway. And Henry Tilney, he comes right out the gate and he is apologizing. He says, I cannot believe the way that my dad behaved. As soon as I heard that you were kicked out of the house, Catherine, I had to immediately come to check on you. When General Tilney and Eleanor left on that engagement, I refused to go with them, and I could not rest until I saw that you were safe. It's very clear that he wants to kind of explain more, but there are so many people in the room, right? We've got Miss Moreland, we've got all the children, and so Henry asks, he says, hey, I know that the Allens are nearby, maybe we should go and visit them. And would you, Catherine, be so kind as to show me the way? And one of the siblings points out that you can see the house from the window, and Catherine doesn't need to show you. But dear old mom is starting to get a little bit wise, and so dear old mom decides that she is going to walk, the three of them are going to walk to the Allen home. This allows Henry to kind of have more of a private chat with Catherine and discuss what was going on, and so he launches into the tale about how General Tilney heard from John Thorpe that day in the theater when those two were being chummy. He had told General Tilney that Catherine Moreland was coming into a lot of money, that clearly the Morelands must be well off, but not only that, that Mr. and Mrs. Allen were childless, and so as their favorite, not only is Catherine going to inherit the money from the Morelands, but she also is going to inherit everything from the Allens as their adopted daughter, and that she is probably going to be the wealthiest woman in Bath. And this is why General Tilney was so nice to her. He had thought that she was wealthy, and these two didn't really know that this was something that was happening. These two thought that maybe dad had turned a new leaf, but that it turned out that when General Tilney was away that one time, right before he came home and kicked her out, that he had run into John Thorpe again, and John Thorpe now was bad-mouthing the Morelands because of what had happened with Isabella, and he had made it very clear that Catherine Moreland was going to inherit almost nothing, and that she is extremely poor. The only reason John Thorpe was talking her up to begin with is because he had thought that these two were going to get married, but that had backfired. General Tilney immediately comes home and kicks her out because all that he really cared about was the money. When Henry Tilney had gotten word of that, he immediately went to Catherine's home to apologize to her, and essentially he got in a big fight with General Tilney, and General Tilney has essentially disowned Henry. So Henry is going to have no money whatsoever. Even though he has no money, he is very upfront about this, and he tells Catherine that he enjoys her company. He makes it very clear to her that if she would be willing to marry someone as penniless as him, that he would be the happiest man alive, and how when he first met her, really he is pretty upfront about the fact that he only liked her because she very clearly liked him, but that the more he got to know her, the more that they spent time together, the more that they built a friendship, and the more that he kind of grew to fall in love with her as well. And so even though his original reason for loving her is not the most romantic thing, loving someone because they like you is not necessarily something that you want to tell your significant other, but I think that it is very funny. There are relationships that start and very happy relationships that start because one person was very clearly interested in another person, and that was enough. Our romantic male lead, he is pretty upfront about the fact that in the beginning he liked Catherine because she liked him, but that it very clearly grew from there. They eventually go hang out with the Allens. They come home and Henry tells the Morlands that he wants to marry their daughter. They are kind of surprised, but they say, yes, you can marry our daughter, but you have one condition. You need to get your dad's approval as well. And when that happens, we will gladly let you two get married. And Henry kind of sighs and realizes that, hey, I just burnt all bridges with my father, and there is no way that he will ever say yes. And so just like that, the dreams of these two getting married were kind of dashed. And Henry feels that this is a lost cause, that the dad will never let them get married, especially since Catherine has no money. And so Henry parts from Catherine. He goes back to Woodston. She stays at the Moreland home, and they're pretty sure that their dreams are dashed. But luckily, we had Eleanor come to the rescue. Eleanor ends up being engaged very suddenly to a viscount who is unnamed in kind of this deus ex machina type thing. Eleanor had been in love with this man for years. He had come and visited the home in the past, and he originally wasn't set to inherit anything. And so General Tilney forbid Eleanor to marry this man, but he ended up becoming a viscount. He inherited a bunch of money. He inherited a title. And so as soon as he inherited this thing, the very first thing that the new viscount did was he asked Eleanor Tilney's hand in marriage, and Eleanor said yes, and so the general was very, very happy that his daughter is going to have so much money, and the narrator lets the reader know that, oh, it would be a cardinal sin of a author to go ahead and introduce a new character at the 11th hour, so don't worry, he'd been around all along, and in fact, this unnamed viscount is the person who had been staying in the same room that Catherine was in Northanger Abbey. And remember that long laundry list of chores to be done about starching shirts and ironing pants and making sure things are all in order? Well, it turns out that that list belonged to the unnamed viscount from when he was staying at Northanger Abbey all those years ago. So, oh, don't worry, dear reader, he has been in the story all along. Because General Tilney is so happy for this upcoming marriage with Eleanor and the viscount, he has decided that he is going to give his consent for Henry Tilney to marry the poor Catherine Morland, because who knows, maybe one day she will come into just as much money anyway, and if not, he is already making sure that his family is set up well enough. Henry and Catherine end up happily married, and the narrator decides to let us know that actually, even though these two seemed like they were going to be apart for so long, it was only about a year after they first met that they ended up married. And so these two lived happily ever after, with Catherine being only 18 years old and him being in his mid-20s, and that finding your final happiness in life for the rest of your life at such young ages is true happiness indeed. So that is the story of Northanger Abbey. Thank you for sticking with me for so long. Genuinely, I hope that you end up reading this story. It is absolutely one of my favorites. I kind of love the play on the importance of reading so many things, the play on the importance of not labeling things as purely male or female, things that are men's work and things that are women's work, but that truly secure people can kind of have both. And I think that this tale is something that, even though it was something that was a little bit outdated with very much name-dropping common books at the time and kind of making fun of some of those Gothic novels, that it is very much a love letter to those Gothic novels, and that it is a really, really good story and something that has held up, even though it's a little bit absurd and even though it's a little bit funny and fantastical. I think it's Jane Austen's very best work, so if you have not read it, please do so. I promise you that I mean, I tried my best to make it interesting. I tried my best to get through the story here, but it is really, really funny. It is really, really witty. And there is a lot to be learned from it, even if maybe your first reading of it is something that it's a little bit difficult to read, especially if you're not used to classics. Hopefully this video helped you with some of the actual beat by beat breakdown, so that way when you pick up the story for yourself, you can focus more on some of the funny dialogue, some of the quips, and now that you already know the background of the tale, you can focus on some of the meat there, because it's a really, really good story. I would highly, highly recommend it. And even if you're somebody who doesn't read a lot of classics, I think that it's definitely worth it, especially if you know some of the context behind what's going to happen. It will make your reading a little bit easier. So thank you so much for spending way too much time with me. Thank you for clicking on this ridiculously long video. If you did click on this long video, you have absolutely passed the vibe check. In the comments below, let me know if there's any others that you want to see me do in kind of this breakdown style. I had a lot of fun making this one. I had a lot of fun reading with this one. So I am very grateful that you decided to watch along with this too. Some girl in her bedroom yapping about her favorite books to a camera here. Thank you for clicking on my video and spending your time with me.